Chapter 1954. Rumbling sounds continued to be heard as the sword aura and the fist aura continued to attack each other. Blood red, lightning, and flames could be said to be one after another, completely enveloping the two of them. Even though many people wanted to see clearly and understand what was going on inside, they couldn't see anything and could only worry there. Although they could sense the changes in power, the power was simply too strong. Under such an impact, they couldn't sense it clearly at all. However, they could feel that the two forces had already begun to go downhill. Obviously, they had already clashed. Waves of aftershocks from the battle were like ripples that continuously swept out, affecting everything within a radius of tens of miles. Even some of the smaller mountains were smashed into powder by the shockwave. Even the sacred Jade Mountain, which was protected by a formation, trembled a few times. From this, it could be seen how terrifying the eruption of their power was. If an ordinary person were to suffer such an attack, the final outcome would probably not be easy, or even directly annihilated. Even though they couldn't see clearly what was going on, everyone's state of mind was drawn to that place, because they really wanted to know what the result would be. All of a sudden, they also felt that the two forces had become stronger at this moment. It could be said that one wave had not yet subsided, and another wave had risen. The two of them were in high spirits as they fought, and once again they gathered their power and began another round of confrontation. The corners of many people's mouths couldn't help but twitch. This kind of aftershock was simply too terrifying. How exactly did they cultivate? Their power was so endless that they could squander it as they wished. It could be said that this battle had incomparably shocked the hearts of many people. They felt that all of this was like a dream because it was beyond the scope of common sense. It was unbelievable. Facing such an exciting battle, Muyang didn't even take a look at it. That was because the pressure he was feeling now was extremely great and even very uncomfortable. Muyang also knew that if he couldn't break the sacred jade killing heart formation, it was likely that they would inevitably be defeated. However, once the formation was broken, it would be equivalent to taking the firewood from under the cauldron. At that time, Zhao Tianming would lose the support of the formation, and his strength would naturally drop a lot. At that time, it would no longer be an idea for them to join forces and kill Zhao Tianming. Therefore, how to break the formation had become a difficult problem for Muyang. Fortunately, after several probing attacks, he was able to see some clues and had a rough idea of what was going on. But how to break the formation after that also required skill. Thousands of miles away, a white-robed man gazed in the direction of the sacred Jade Mountain. Although he couldn't see anything, he had a confidant who was constantly reporting the situation of the battle to him. This person was Ouyang Cheng, the only remaining one of the three heavyweights. The outcome of the battle at St. Jade Mountain would have a huge impact on him. Therefore, he had to find out what was going on over there. Only then could he make a judgment and decide what to do next to protect his position and life. Although the arrival of this outsider had caused their profound fighting world to suffer heavy losses, Ouyang Cheng had no choice but to accept this reality and implement more benefits. Since he was the only one left of the three heavyweights, then no matter what the outcome was, as long as he, Ouyang Cheng, worked hard, he would become an existence second only to one person. Moreover, that person might not necessarily care about the profound fighting world at all. He was just a high and mighty almighty who was waiting to absorb resources. In this short period of time, a chessboard had already appeared in Ouyang Cheng's chest. He had already completed more than half of how to place the pieces. This is really interesting. It seems that it's time for the profound fighting world to change. Ouyang Cheng said with some disappointment, and his smile became a lot more bitter. Even if it was no longer the glory of the past, everything still had to go on. If he blindly remained silent and couldn't walk out of the past, then he would be a real fool. Although he was helpless to accept reality, he was a real hero if he could accept it. In the sacred Jade Mountain, some disciples had already been buried in the flames. Many elders felt their hearts ache when they saw this. Even though there were two ninth-level powerhouses among them, because of the control of the formation, they couldn't rush out and fight with that person who did whatever he wanted. Therefore, they could only worry helplessly. There was no way they could do anything. Although the formation's attacks had hit that outsider a few times, he didn't seem to be affected much. Instead, he became more and more courageous as he fought, and his attacks became more and more powerful. It was hard to understand. Sometimes, things made people feel helpless. There was no way to change anything, and they could only silently accept it. Mu Yang's injuries were not few, but it also aroused his bloodthirst. Haha, I've found you. Let's see what you can do. Mu Yang suddenly saw something and laughed. In the next moment, the vermilion flame token in his hand suddenly shot out a flame. As the flame rushed forward, it suddenly turned into a fire dragon and rushed towards the inconspicuous stone tablet. Seeing the fire dragon's attack, the upper echelons of the sacred Jade Mountain immediately became anxious. They naturally knew that that was where the formation core was. If it was broken, the consequences would be unimaginable. In the blink of an eye, some cultivators immediately rushed over, wanting to block the attack. However, what they did was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. King Wu's 8th level cultivation was far from enough. In the end, they could only set themselves on fire. Boom! With a sound, the stone tablet suddenly exploded. One of the 9th level powerhouses hiding inside cried out. He was burned by the flames and was in extreme pain. With the destruction of one of the formation cores, the sacred jade killing heart formation trembled. In the blink of an eye, its power decreased by a bit. It's here! Mu Yang suddenly exclaimed in surprise. Because of the trembling of the formation, it was inevitable that some problems would be exposed. Mu Yang had been waiting for an opening to appear. Furthermore, he seized this opportunity and didn't let it slip through his hands. He was very decisive. In the blink of an eye, he quickly activated the vermilion flame token. Numerous fire dragons roared out, rushing towards the formation cores. The sound of shattering could be said to be one after another. Most of them were the screams of the cultivators. In the end, the formation lost its footing and couldn't hold on. Chapter 1955. At this moment, countless light screens began to shatter. An incomparably tyrannical, sacred jade, killing heart array was finally unable to hold on any longer and began to shatter. At the same time, there were also countless disciples who fell to the ground due to the backlash of the array, constantly screaming in pain. On sacred Jade Mountain, countless flames continued to burn, and in the blink of an eye, many places had been burned down. At the same time, many places had also been affected and were devoured by the giant beast of fire. Sacred Jade Mountain, which was the supreme place in the hearts of all the cultivators of the profound Dough world, had now become a scene of devastation. As if under the flames, it would become a barren land. At this moment, many people's blood was boiling, and they couldn't help but want to rush up and kill the culprit, the outsider. However, they still didn't dare to act rashly. They had all seen the power of a saint rank upper rank artifact. If they rashly rushed over, the final result would only be to set themselves on fire. Mu Yang watched with satisfaction as the array continued to shatter, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly, but a stream of blood flowed out. He had been seriously injured long ago, and because he couldn't break the array before, he forced himself to hold on and didn't take it to heart. Now his heart that had been tense for too long had relaxed a lot, and he couldn't stop himself. Suddenly he felt a killing, intent attack, and he didn't dare to think too much, and prepared to control the flying ship to leave. However, he was too slow, and the stream of light directly pierced through the flying ship, and at the same time through his body. Mu Yang fell on the bow of the ship, his eyes filled with anger. He originally thought that the array had been broken, but he didn't expect that there was still a move left, a shattering attack. Fortunately, the power wasn't enough to destroy the world, and it only seriously injured him, and didn't directly kill him. However, even though Mu Yang was still alive, it it was almost impossible for him to continue fighting. Now, what Mu Yang was most worried about was whether the cultivators of the profound Do world would make a move after seeing him fall. If they were to make a move, with his current condition, he would only be able to wait helplessly for death. Fortunately, everyone's attention was attracted by Xiao Yang and Zhao Tianming, and no one saw the changes on the flying ship. After the formation shattered, many people placed their hopes on Zhao Tianming. Only he could turn the tide and wash away the shame of their profound fighting world. Suddenly, there was another violent explosion. The two people who had been entangled for a long time could no longer continue fighting at this moment. They were forced back by each other's strength. The bodies of the two people fell in different directions, like meteors. Has the outcome been decided? Or has life and death already been decided? Many people were very curious, but they soon felt that the two of them were still alive. Although their auras had been greatly reduced, they were not weak. It's not over yet. That brat is truly a monster. The cultivators from the profound Do world who were watching the battle were now ready to make a move. If the person from the outside world was already heavily injured, it was not impossible for them to kill him if they all swarmed forward. However, no one was willing to be the first to take the lead. After all, if the other party still had the ability to continue the battle, then the first person to rush over would probably be the first to be killed. It was also because they wanted to live that they did not act rashly. Instead, they quietly waited for the result to arrive. Looking at the billowing smoke and dust, their eyes widened. Mu Yang took advantage of the fact that no one was paying attention to him and immediately stood up. However, he still looked very weak. Now, Mu Yang's condition was very bad. Under the serious injury, he did not have much strength left. After all, if he wanted to control the Zhu Yanling to attack without restraint, it would consume a lot of spiritual energy. In addition, he had been restrained by the formation before, and it was difficult to replenish it. Now he was already at the bottom. If I still had an explosive pill, perhaps the situation could be changed. Mu Yang thought helplessly in his heart. However, it was useless to think about it now. He could only place all his hopes on his companion. He hoped that he could really be invincible in the realm of King Wu. Otherwise, even if he broke the formation, if he could not defeat Zhao Tianming, then the outcome would still be difficult to change. It could be said that one of them was bound to die. Otherwise, both of them would become a disaster and no one would be able to sleep peacefully. Zhao Tianming took the lead and rushed up. He hovered in the sky and watched as half of his sacred jade mountain turned into ashes in the sea of fire. His heart was in great pain. This was a place that he had managed for hundreds of years. Who would have thought that it would be burned down because of a big fire? Very quickly, Zhao Tianming saw the culprit. He did not have much confidence to begin with, but he was still forcefully holding on. He looked very hateful. However, Zhao Tianming did not immediately attack to kill that hateful person. Instead, he hovered in the air, not moving at all. It was not that Zhao Tianming did not want to kill him with lightning speed, but that he could not. In the previous exchange with Xiaoyang, he had been hit 7 times. Even his meridians had been severed. It could be said that he was heavily injured and could not continue. In this short period of time, he had to quickly recover his strength. Otherwise, when that kid caught his breath, it would be time for him to die. Zhao Tianming knew very well that although Xiaoyang had been hit 3 times by him and was able to severely injure him, it was still very difficult to kill him. Xiaoyang was indeed not feeling well at the moment, even though he had the support of the true intent Wanxiang art, and his defense was unparalleled. However, facing Zhao Tianming's bombardment, it was still a bit difficult. With just 2 punches, the will and qi were shattered. As for the third punch, it was even more solid. More than half of the ribs in his chest were broken. Even his internal organs had suffered quite a bit of shock as a result, causing cracks to appear on them. The current Xiaoyang was somewhat delirious and absent-minded. However, he quickly calmed down. Knowing that now was not the time to fall, he immediately rushed up. Even though the pain was constantly coming, causing his face to distort, his eyes were very firm. Moreover, the hand holding the sword was very steady, as if it could not be shaken. When the cultivators of the profound fighting world saw this person rush out again, they were even more shocked. Under such circumstances, he could still continue fighting? Could it be that he had an indestructible body? Chapter 1956. Many people simply could not understand. Under Zhao Tianming's killing blow, it was already enough that this young man had not been killed directly. Now he was jumping up and down, as if he was prepared to continue fighting. Could it be that he really had a body of steel? Too many questions constantly appeared in their minds, but no one could give them the answers. No one could say for sure what was going on, but they could be sure that this outsider was still in existence that they could not afford to offend. Although he looked sickly now, it was still unknown how much power he could unleash. Even though they saw that the situation was about to end, no one dared to act rashly and try to help their world. The happiest person was Muyang, because from his point of view, if this young man could continue to stand up, it was enough to show how terrifying he was. At least, he still had the ability to continue fighting. At least, he still had a chance of survival and would not die here. In fact, Muyang was very clear that if the two of them really died here, then because of the revenge of the profound Dou world, the flowing cloud world that they were in would be destroyed and attacked. At that time, all the living things in the flowing cloud world would be poisoned. That was not impossible. Therefore, after reaching the sacred Jade Mountain, there was no way out. They had to obtain victory. Only then could they protect the flowing cloud world behind them. Zhao Tianming looked at Xiaoyang. His breathing became a lot more hurried, a strange light flashing in his eyes. At this moment, he really felt that he was getting old, that he was already old. Against such a young and hot-blooded brat, it was clear that he did not have the strength to do so. The other party's bravery was something that could not be envied, especially that momentum of fighting to the death. It was even more shocking. Fighting with his life on the line, Zhao Tianming had also used such a strategy in the past. But later on, because of his high position, he had become much more dignified. With another glance, he saw that those juniors or people of the same generation had cultivation, but were still afraid and did not have the courage to attack. Immediately, he could not help but feel a chill in his heart. From the looks of it, these guys really bullied the weak and feared the strong. Usually, when they invaded other worlds, they were all arrogant, despotic, and haughty. Until now, their world had suffered a blow, but they could only watch from the sidelines. They did not dare to make a move or speak. Perhaps, after he killed that young man, these guys would immediately rush up to him to split the loot. Being bitterly disappointed was probably just like that. From the very beginning, Zhao Tianming had never thought that he would lose. But now his thoughts were shaken. It could be said that in that battle, Zhao Tianming had the upper hand from the very beginning. But unfortunately, because the Jade Saint killing heart formation was broken, it caused him to be unable to continue the momentum, and thus some flaws appeared. Of course, the scariest thing was that the opponent had seized this opportunity. Without the support of the Jade Saint killing heart formation, Zhao Tianming's only advantage was that he had one more spirit vein than Xiaoyang. If they were used against ordinary cultivators, they would still be able to crush them. However, no matter how one looked at it, that young man was probably not an ordinary person. How could it be easy to defeat him? Thinking of this, Zhao Tianming also felt a little uncomfortable in his heart. It was very uncomfortable. However, he was powerless to change anything. Even though he had already reached this step and Zhao Tianming's heart was shaken, in his eyes, his chances of winning were still much higher. However, how to achieve victory had become an extremely difficult problem. Although the opponent was young and full of vigor, Zhao Tianming had the experience of thousands of years of fighting and the cultivation that surpassed the peak of the 9th stage. Kid, I didn't expect you to be able to stand up. It seems that a pure martial artist does indeed have a huge advantage. This is truly enviable, Zhao Tianming said with a smile. Zhao Tianming also did not expect that a pure martial artist could actually erupt with such terrifying power. Moreover, the physical defense was also very terrifying. If a peak 9th stage cultivator took 3 of his bloodthirsty wolf fangs head-on, he would probably be dead long ago. However, the opponent could still stand up now, and his fighting spirit was still very strong. It could be seen how terrifying he was. Sometimes the truth made people feel helpless. Xiaoyang only smiled indifferently and said, "Who told you that I'm a pure martial artist?" As soon as these words came out, Zhao Tianming's eyes immediately widened. If that was not the case, then how terrifying would this person be? Thinking of this, Zhao Tianming was also very shocked. Could it be that he still had some tricks up his sleeve? Xiao Yang pointed at the Thunderfire Divine sword in his hand and said, "Previously it was only because your formation suppressed me that I chose the simplest physical skill. Now that the formation has been broken, how are you going to compete with me?" As soon as these words came out, it could be said that the whole world was shocked. What was this guy talking about? Could it be that his spiritual power cultivation was also very terrifying? Many people felt that this was just a bluff. However, Zhao Tianming could feel that the opponent's aura was indeed rising at an extremely fast speed. This was not bragging, but just stating a fact. It was very real. "Good lad, you've hidden yourself well." Zhao Tianming laughed loudly and said, "I didn't think of this, but even if you hid a trick up your sleeve, so what? The consumption is also very terrifying. Even if you can go all out now, how much stronger can you be compared to before? Do you think you can defeat me like this? Kill me? You will never be able to make up for the gap of this spiritual vein." As Zhao Tianming spoke, his aura began to rise again. Since things had already come to this point, although there were many unknowns, Zhao Tianming firmly believed that his advantage was still very clear. It was only a matter of time to defeat the opponent. Although he was absolutely stunning and had the ability to shake him, it did not mean that he could defeat the opponent. At this moment, Zhao Tianming also knew that he had to kill the opponent with all his strength. Otherwise, if the slightest flaw appeared, it would be a disaster. Chapter 1957. Hearing these words, many people's hearts had already become numb. This was because they had already heard and seen too many shocking things before. It was as if no matter what kind of accident happened to that young man, it was as if it was a matter of course, and there would not be any surprise at all. This made people wonder who exactly this young man was, and how many trump cards he had. Could that remote and dilapidated drifting cloud world really give birth to such a powerful cultivator? Or was the drifting cloud world's decline only on the surface? However, when some cultivators traveled to other worlds, they understood that the drifting cloud world was under the oppression of the demon world, and they could not even breathe. However, they also neglected another problem, and that was that their travels were also something that happened 1,000 years ago. Xiaoyang was a figure who had only recently emerged. Furthermore, it was also because of his appearance that the flowing cloud world had undergone tremendous changes long ago. Back then, King Wu was a level 5 cultivator, and he was able to dominate an area, establish his own sect, and become a top force. However, King Wu was a rare level 5 cultivator, and now there were many. Furthermore, because of the return of the ancestors of a few big forces, the drifting cloud world was pushed to a new height. Although it still could not be compared to those top forces, in terms of top forces, with Xiaoyang and Muyang, it was enough to make many worlds tremble in fear. It could be said that Xiaoyang's battle was to let more worlds know that the drifting cloud world was not a world that could be bullied by others, and that it was not as weak as before. And today he was going to show his might in this battle. "Let's try and we'll know," Xiaoyang said, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Now, Xiaoyang had completely suppressed his injuries. Although his chest was still a little painful because of the barbed ribs, it was not unbearable. The originally unsmooth flow of qi was barely maintained at this moment. These words sounded light and airy, but the killing intent contained in them was extraordinary. Zhao Tianming knew this very well. Haha, then come over and give it a try. Let's see how capable you are. Zhao Tianming said as he laughed even more heartily. Zhao Tianming had seen a lot of arrogant people. At the same time, in his opinion, this young man was indeed extraordinary. However, even if he had the confidence to say such words, it would be difficult for him to do so. Soon after, Zhao Tianming clasped his hands together. His pair of gloves once again emitted a blood-red glow. This time, the blood-red light emitted was even more terrifying than before. It was like a bloody mist. In the blink of an eye, the smell of blood could no longer be suppressed as it struggled to disperse. It could be said that the area within a radius of 1,000 miles was shrouded in the smell of blood. At this moment, many wild beasts were kneeling on the ground, trembling. Even the weaker cultivators couldn't help but tremble in fear when they smelled the scent of blood. It was as if he was in the middle of this sea of blood. Perhaps in the next moment he would be killed directly. Even the blood in his body would become a part of this bloody mist. Even the cultivators below the 5th level of Kingwu felt as if the blood in their bodies was being pulled. It was about to burst out of their bodies and merge with the bloody mist. In an instant, many people were in unbearable pain. It was a fate worse than death. Fortunately, the juniors who came to watch the battle were all led by the elders of the sect. In addition, they were far away. Hence, they were able to stabilize their bodies and prevent them from exploding and dying. What method did Lord Zhao use? It's so terrifying. An old man said worriedly after helping his child stabilize his state of mind. The person sitting beside the old man shook his head helplessly and sighed. He said, "This killing move is too terrifying. I'm afraid that all living things within 1,000 miles will die suddenly. Even if they don't die, they will be extremely weak. I've never seen or heard of such a method. Although this move is cruel and can easily injure our own people, it doesn't matter. As long as we can take down that arrogant person, this small sacrifice is worth it." Many people began to discuss softly. However, they did not dare to make a sound for fear of being overheard. Ever since Zhao Tianming went into seclusion, he had become temperamental. This was something that the entire profound Dou world knew. Now, they also had some thoughts in their hearts. Could it be that such a situation occurred because he cultivated this kind of cultivation method? Many people had such guesses in their hearts. However, no one dared to say a word about the truth. When Xiaoyang felt that even the air was filled with killing intent, he could not help but frown. He knew that this was Zhao Tianming's final trump card. Under this move, it was likely that the final outcome would be either one of them dying or one of them dying. Xiaoyang, on the other hand, held his divine sword horizontally. His brows were filled with determination. "Since you want to fight with your life, then I'll fight with my life. What's the harm in that?" Xiaoyang had never been a person who was afraid of battle. He would not be afraid because of his opponent's strength. Moreover, although the might of this move was terrifying, it was not unbreakable and unbearable. However, if he wanted to obtain victory, it would definitely not be an easy task. He might even have to pay a certain price. Under the immense pressure, Mu Yang could not hold on any longer. He collapsed on the airship, gasping for breath. He looked like he was in great pain. Mu Yang was not far from Zhao Tianming. Although he was not deliberately targeting him, it was still difficult for him to endure. If he was at his peak, he would not be able to resist. However, the current him was heavily injured and did not have much strength left. He could only endure and feel terrible. At this moment, Mu Yang's heart could not help but sink into a gloomy darkness. This was because he felt that under this move, they would really be finished. In fact, even the entire flowing cloud world would be affected. It might even cease to exist. The more he thought about it, the more uncomfortable Mu Yang felt. Although their actions could not be said to be rash, they did not understand enough. That was why this calamity had occurred. It could be said that man proposes, but God disposes. Who would have thought that this old monster of the profound Dou world would be so terrifying? Brat, enjoy yourself in my bloody stupa. Chapter 1958. After Zhao Tianming finished speaking, he let out a loud roar and pushed both of his hands forward. Immediately, the countless blood mist gathered together at an extremely fast speed. Like a spearhead, it was pointed directly at Xiaoyang and charged towards him. At the same time, Zhao Tianming's body continued to emit blood mist. This was his ultimate move. Naturally, he had to give it his all. Therefore, his power was pouring out crazily. Even his essence blood was mixed in. The power was extremely terrifying. Zhao Tianming's goal was very simple. He wanted to kill Xiaoyang. Since he had already used his ultimate move, he had to make sure that it was foolproof. Since his opponent's defense was extremely terrifying, he would use the purest form of power to crush him. His opponent could not resist at all. He would use his power to kill him. It could be said that this was the purest form of power bombardment. There was not much technique to speak of. There was only endless power and the killing intent that he had accumulated throughout his life. At this moment, it was completely unleashed to crush his opponent. At this moment, Mu Yang's entire body started to tremble. He felt as if he was in hell. It was extremely uncomfortable. It was as if the Grim Reaper's scythe was right in front of him. In just a moment, his life would be taken away. Being pulled by that power, Mu Yang felt extremely uncomfortable. He could not imagine what kind of pressure Xiaoyang, who was being targeted, would face. Would he be able to withstand it? Xiaoyang stood there, unmoving like a mountain. Although he also felt a sense of restraint, it was not that serious. He was also very surprised that Zhao Tianming could learn such a martial technique. It was truly terrifying. It could be said that this could not be considered a martial technique. It was not much different from an evil technique. The howls of the ghost road kept ringing in his ears. It was as if a malicious spirit was demanding his life. It was howling nonstop. I did not expect your mind to be so firm. You are not affected at all. Zhao Tianming said in surprise when he saw that Mu Yang was unmoved. This was something that Zhao Tianming did not expect. At the same time, it was understandable. As a pure martial artist, if his mind was not firm enough, how could he reach the peak of King Wu? Therefore, this was to be expected. However, it still made people feel that it was somewhat outstanding. Back then, Zhao Tianming had used this move to slaughter all the living beings in a city. Among them, there was no lack of people of the same realm. Xiaoyang swung his sword and narrowed his eyes. Looks like you're just SOO. Hearing those words, Zhao Tianming coldly snorted. He waved his sleeve and the blood mist became even stronger. Fish in a dried pond. I didn't expect you to use a spirit vein as the price to activate this evil technique. It seems that you also want to kill me. You're willing to pay such a high price, Xiaoyang said with a slight smirk. When the surrounding cultivators heard this explanation, their hearts were immediately filled with shock. They found it hard to believe that this was the truth. The way they looked at their former leader had changed once again. There was fear in their eyes. However, some people saw something different. If this leader really used a spirit vein as the price, then he would no longer be an existence that surpassed the peak. The overall strength of their profound fighting world would also be much lower because of the reduction of their leader's strength. Was it really necessary to pay such a high price to kill an outsider? This made many people feel very puzzled. It was not worth it to do so. As expected, you're experienced and knowledgeable. You can even see through this. If I want to kill you with ordinary means, it's naturally impossible. However, under this move, you will definitely die, Zhao Tianming said. At this moment, his smile became much more ferocious. At this point, Zhao Tianming also understood that this kid's future was limitless. If they let him escape today, who knows how many years later he might make a comeback. At that time, he was afraid that he would not be a match for him. Therefore, It was most reassuring to completely get rid of this future trouble. If he killed him in the cradle, then this threat would naturally disappear. Zhao Tianming was able to bring the weak, profound fighting world to its current prosperity. Naturally, he was extremely decisive in killing without the slightest hesitation. Especially under such circumstances, if he was stingy with his cultivation, he would probably have to pay a greater price in the future. Although the price he had to pay now was not small, what harm was there in that? At least all the uncertain factors could be determined. In the future, he would not have to worry about when this enemy would come knocking on his door. Since you're courting death, then I'll fulfill your wish. After Xiaoyang finished speaking, his entire body suddenly moved. In the next moment, a silver spear appeared in his left hand. From the blood mist, Xiaoyang could feel that this old monster had probably killed countless people to be able to practice this evil technique to such an extent. It was not an exaggeration to say that this person had committed a heinous crime. In the future, in order to make this evil technique stronger, more innocent people would be persecuted. Thunder move fire sweep. 10,000 poison, thunder dragon roar. The sword and spear in Xiaoyang's hands were thrown out at the same time. These two moves could be said to be Xiaoyang's strongest martial skills. At this moment, they were also used at the same time. The power of this blood-floating massacre was extraordinary. If one wanted to use a single martial skill to break it, it would be almost impossible. However, if two martial skills were used, there might be some slight changes. When Zhao Tianming saw that Xiaoyang had actually used two such powerful martial skills in a short period of time, his heart trembled slightly. He felt that this was somewhat inconceivable. So what if you are powerful? Under this move of mine, you will also be unable to change the situation. Just wait for your death in peace. Zhao Tianming shouted angrily. At the same time, his hands began to push again. The lightning and fire sword qi struggled and charged at each other, pushing aside the blood mist and opening up a path for them. At the same time, the blood mist was also squeezing at an extremely fast speed. Countless flames and thunder were constantly being crushed. The thunder dragon followed closely behind, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. It was extremely terrifying. At this moment, the blood mist was also crazily surging into Xiao Yang's body and starting to crush and kill. Xiaoyang had no choice but to stop his body and forcefully support himself with a breath of will. However, the huge pressure was difficult to bear, and in the blink of an eye, his face had already turned pale. Chapter 1959. As the blood mist pressed down, Xiaoyang felt as if the blood vessels in his body were being pulled by an extremely strong force, as if they were about to burst out of his body. At the same time, the pressure from the external force was unbearable. The reason why Bloody Stupa was said to be an evil technique and not a martial skill was because of this. Using the blood mist as the price to draw out the opponent's blood and cause them to die from blood exhaustion, one could see how terrifying and cruel it was. Under such pressure, Xiaoyang still gritted his teeth and persevered. This was because, if he couldn't withstand it, he would probably die from blood exhaustion. At that time, once his body lost its blood, it would become shriveled. Under the pressure, he would probably be crushed to pieces. When Zhao Tianming saw this scene, he was overjoyed in his heart. This was what he wanted to see. So what if Xiaoyang's body was strong? However, the blood stupa was not aimed at physical defense, but was directed from the inside, making it difficult for one to defend against the attacks from both inside and outside. For a time, it could be said to be a mournful land. As Zhao Tianming continued to increase his strength, even some of the weaker people on Sacred Jade Mountain directly died, losing all their blood. Immediately, everyone in the surrounding area could be said to be in danger. Many people were struggling to protect themselves, so they did not have the ability to protect their own disciples or juniors. As for the people watching the battle 100 miles away, they were not affected as much, so they could barely hold on. Zhao Tianming did not feel the slightest bit of heartache for his disciples dying under this move. Of course, from his point of view, it was an honor for these people to die in his hands. In the blink of an eye, there were already complaints everywhere. They never would have thought that they would not die on the battlefield to open up the land for the profound fighting world, but lose their lives under the might of their own people. Even Muyang, who was at the peak of the 9th level, could only bitterly hold on. It could be said to be extremely miserable. Fortunately, Muyang was also someone who had seen great storms, so he had always protected his heart and suppressed it with all his strength. Only then was he able to preserve his life. Right now, Xiaoyang was not in a good state either. In a flash, some beads of blood flowed out from under his skin. Although it wasn't a lot, it was enough to shake one's heart. From this, it could be seen just how terrifying the Blood Buddha's power and pulling force was. The current Zhao Tianming was like a demon from hell. He was wantonly harvesting blood and lives, completely disregarding the consequences. It could be said that he did as he pleased without any scruples. Even though everyone in the profound fighting world was complaining, who would dare to show the slightest dissatisfaction? Zhao Tianming's current state could be said to be in a state of madness. If he angered Zhao Tianming, what he would face would be an unwarranted killing intent. Now that they weren't targeted and were only affected, it was enough for more people to survive. This caused them to be extremely satisfied, and they didn't dare ask for anything else. I'd like to see how long you can hold on, Zhao Tianming said as his laughter became even more rampant, almost as if he had gone mad. Xiaoyang gritted his teeth and held on, allowing the blood mist to continue, squeezing him. In the next moment, with a low shout, Xiaoyang's entire body flashed with lightning. His entire body was like a ball of lightning, dispersing the blood mist. Only then did he feel much better. At the same time, although the sword qi had been exhausted, however, the thunder dragon had arrived. With a dragon's roar, the thunder dragon poured into Zhao Tianming's body at an extremely fast speed. It continued to weave in and out, wreaking havoc in his body. Zhao Tianming was unable to defend himself at all. He could only grit his teeth and endure the pain. He didn't know how serious the injuries this move would cause him, but with this little power, he was confident that he wouldn't die. Therefore, Zhao Tianming didn't stop what he was doing. He continued to control the blood mist and continued to attack Xiaoyang. The blood mist continued to squeeze toward Xiaoyang, causing the surrounding blood mist to shrink at an extremely fast speed. As a result, the cultivators in the periphery instantly lost the huge pressure. Instantly, many people cried tears of joy, as if they had survived a disaster. They were extremely grateful. However, that was only for the periphery. For those within a 10-mile radius of Zhao Tianming, they were still suppressed to the point of being unable to breathe. Fortunately, the power was constantly being reduced. Xiaoyang continuously waved the silver lightning spear and thunder fire divine sword in his hands, continuously releasing the power of lightning to fight against the blood mist. However, because the blood in his body was being pulled in, the power that he could unleash was naturally greatly reduced. But this was enough. It was enough to give him a way out of this predicament. Muyang looked at Xiaoyang, who was surrounded by lightning and blood mist, and gritted his teeth in hatred. Why was he so useless? Putting aside the fact that he couldn't help, it was almost impossible for him to even move a muscle. Xiaoyang, on the other hand, didn't think so much. He had been holding on to his heart, and at the same time, trying his best to control his blood qi. He also used his will to move and use lightning to sweep away the blood mist, reducing the pressure on him so that he wouldn't be unable to resist. Seeing that Xiaoyang's method was actually effective, Zhao Tianming's expression turned ugly. The lightning dragon's power had long been exhausted, and it had disappeared from this world. However, the injuries it suffered weren't as serious as expected. It was like a strong start, but a weak finish. This made Zhao Tianming secretly happy. This guy in the end will still be exhausted. Young people are young people. They don't know how to use their power perfectly. Seeing that his opponent was struggling bitterly, Zhao Tianming felt extremely happy. No matter how much you struggle, you won't be able to change the outcome. Resistance now could be said to be meaningless. At most, he would die a slower death. However, he still couldn't escape death in the end. Zhao Tianming began to calculate in his heart. Since this kid was so strong, it meant that he must have a lot of opportunities on him. If he could obtain it, he would be like a tiger that had grown wings. Die. As Zhao Tianming thought about it, he immediately gathered all the remaining power in the blood mist and exploded it. Chapter 1960. At this moment, the blood mist surged crazily, like an evil spirit that had been hungry for too long and wanted to taste the taste of human flesh and blood. It was very terrifying. The blood mist was like a demon from purgatory. It was constantly baring its fangs and brandishing its claws, preparing to devour the trapped human. In an instant, Xiaoyang also felt a very strong pressure. At this moment, the blood in his body seemed to be completely out of control. It was about to burst out of his body and directly pour out. Xiaoyang's skin and flesh were very tough and could withstand a full-strength attack from a cultivator of the same realm. However, in the face of this kind of attack that came from the inside, he was somewhat helpless. There was almost no difference between him and an ordinary cultivator. If one had to say, Xiaoyang's only advantage was his strong willpower and more knowledge than others. It was also because of this that he could bitterly hold on and not be completely helpless. Feeling his blood oozing out like sweat, Xiaoyang's heart felt extremely uncomfortable. This was because he knew very well that if this continued, he might really die suddenly. Therefore, he had to break this deadlock. However, this kind of evil art was very strange. It was simply impossible to break it. If he thought about it carefully, Xiaoyang could indeed find a way to break it. However, now that things had come to a head, how could he come up with a good idea in such a short time? Therefore, the problem that Xiaoyang was facing now seemed to be somewhat helpless. There was no way to change the situation at all. The only thing he could do was to grit his teeth and persevere. In the blink of an eye, Xiaoyang's skin was already covered in blood. He looked ferocious and terrifying, causing people to feel a chill in their hearts. Seeing that his opponent's face had become completely distorted and ferocious, Zhao Tianming felt very comfortable in his heart. If he increased his strength, he was afraid that his opponent would die without a doubt. However, at this point, Zhao Tianming was also unable to continue. Unless he used another spiritual vein as the price, he could not increase his strength anymore. If he did that, Zhao Tianming's realm would also fall to the 9th stage. At that time, wanting to suppress the profound fighting world with his own strength might not be realistic. Furthermore, in his eyes, everything had already been decided. Xiaoyang would not be able to resist Yue at all. Squeezing and pulling, the two forces continued to wreak havoc. Xiaoyang was almost exhausted from the torment and could not resist. The blood mist continued to surge forward. No matter how powerful the lightning bolts were, they did not stop. All of a sudden, Xiaoyang's body became powerless and directly fell down. At this moment, the blood mist also dissipated. Zhao Tianming watched as the kid fell. He looked weak and feeble, and the smile on his face became even wider. So what if you're still breathing? What was the use of that? Your body no longer has the slightest bit of strength. Other than waiting for death, what else can you do? Zhao Tianming laughed loudly and said, right now, Zhao Tianming was very happy because he had paid a price that surpassed the peak of the 9th stage in order to defeat Xiaoyang and eliminate this future threat. Although the price was great, it was very worth it. After hearing this, Muyang no longer felt as pressured as before. However, at this moment, his heart was like dead ashes. Even Xiaoyang had been defeated, so how could he compete with him? At this moment, Mu Yang's heart was filled with hatred. If he had broken the array earlier and gone to help, this would not have happened. However, It was too late to say anything now because the matter had already become a foregone conclusion. It was not something that could be changed just by thinking. He could only helplessly accept this fact. Immediately, some of the cultivators in Sacred Jade Mountain cheered at this moment. This purgatory-like environment had finally disappeared, and that great enemy had been defeated. Then, what they needed to face next was the arrival of good days. Those who were watching from the outside could not help but break out in cold sweat. They admired that young man very much. His strength was so tyrannical that it was respected. However, as an enemy, the fall of such a person was completely good news for them. However, a trace of doubt appeared in their hearts. That high and mighty Zhao Tianming had changed a little. It was as if he had become not as tall and mighty as before. Xiao Yang fell to the ground, his entire body covered in blood. After taking a deep breath, he stood up. However, his body was swaying, and he looked like he was about to fall. He was relying on the silver spear to support him so that he would not fall. Right now, Xiao Yang could be said to be dizzy and very uncomfortable. Because of this evil art, he had lost half of his vital energy and blood, which was why he was so weak. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was weak and powerless. It was already very difficult for him to stand up now. Your willpower is really strong. You can stand up like this, but what can you change? Zhao Tianming sneered and said. However, Zhao Tianming's eyes were filled with reverence. An opponent like this was worthy of respect. Unfortunately, they were opponents. Furthermore, they were like you, and I would die. It was difficult for them to be compatible. After Xiaoyang took a few deep breaths, he managed to stabilize his condition a little. When he looked up, all he could see were some ripples. They were all caused by his blurred vision, and he couldn't see anything clearly. Suddenly, Xiaoyang laughed as if he had just survived a disaster. However, his laughter was very forced. What are you laughing at? Zhao Tianming frowned when he saw this and asked in confusion. Xiaoyang smiled and shook his head. I'm laughing at your ignorance. Now that death is at hand, you don't even know it. Don't you think you're ridiculous? When these words came out, many people were immediately astonished. Could it be that this guy was already delirious? Now he was spouting nonsense. Many people also laughed because they felt that this young man was very pitiful. They did not expect that at this time he was living in his own imagination. It was difficult to accept this reality. Mu Yang did not think that this was a joke. He did not think that Xiaoyang was a person who spoke without thinking. Since he said so, there was naturally a reason. Zhao Tianming also laughed, but his smile quickly became stiff. His brows were tightly knitted together, and his eyes were filled with confusion. He did not understand. Chapter 1961. On top of a tall mountain, Ouyangcheng stood there. He looked at the slowly setting sun and frowned. His eyes revealed a lot of information. At the same time, he was also thinking about what to do next. Although the game had been completed, there were too many variables. How to proceed had become a huge problem. Therefore, he had no choice but to think of more possibilities. Only by doing so could he deal with it properly. Now that things had come to this, no one could do anything. Therefore, what he needed to think about now was how to clean up this mess and how to make everything beneficial to himself. News from Sacred Jade Mountain was constantly coming in, and the situation could be said to be changing rapidly. Senior brother, I didn't expect so many things to happen today, and I'm afraid that the profound darkness world will also undergo a huge change because of today's matter. A sloppy-looking man walked over. Ouyangcheng didn't need to look to know that the only person who was so sloppy was his junior brother, Wei Wuhui. Senior brother, why are you so distressed? No matter how the situation changes, you're just afraid of fighting. When the time came, he would be able to make a lot of ignorant people change sides with him by making some irresponsible remarks. After all, although you've lost, your strength is still there. Who would dare to provoke you? Even that person from Sacred Jade Mountain wouldn't dare to touch you easily. You're the only peak ninth stage cultivator. Wei Wuhui smiled. Ouyang Qing only smiled indifferently. Naturally, he had thought this through. But in the next period of time, it was inevitable that he would be suppressed. Being targeted was a matter of course and not surprising. I had just received news that Xiaoyang has been beaten to a bloody state. I'm afraid it's already difficult for him to continue fighting. Ouyang Qing said. When Wei Wuhui heard this, he was stunned for a moment. He turned to look at his senior brother, and his eyes were full of doubt and confusion. Immediately, he seemed to have thought of some possibilities and said, "Senior brother, that's not a good idea. It's fine for our sect to be a little sullen in the future, but the prestige of the profound darkness world is still there. You're thinking too much for the sect, so you don't live a free and easy life. Everything you do is restricted." Ouyang Qing just smiled and didn't say anything. If he was as carefree as he was, how could his sect be where it was today? There were some areas that needed to be paid attention to and couldn't be careless. Although I didn't personally witness this battle, based on the news from my disciples, I have to admit that Xiaoyang is indeed a hero. If such a person was in our profound fighting world, he would definitely be the second master. It's a pity. Otherwise, our profound fighting world would be able to control more places and resources. Wei Wuhui said with some regret. Looking at the setting sun, Wei Wuhui felt a little uncomfortable in his heart. Ouyang Qing waved his hand nonchalantly and said, "This matter is already destined. What's the use of discussing it further? On the other hand, we need to be on guard against those with ulterior motives. However, if the disciples split up or even betray us because of this matter, then we will really be sinners of the sect." When Wei Wuhui heard this, he nodded slightly, appearing to be very helpless. Naturally, they were well aware of this. Moreover, such a situation could be said to be inevitable. It wasn't something that could change their minds with just a few words. Moreover, under these rules, they didn't dare to force them. Under the limelight, the more extreme their actions were, the easier it was to put themselves in danger. They might even fall into a difficult situation that they couldn't extricate themselves from. How to recoup their losses became something that they needed to think about carefully now. Suddenly, the jade token in Ouyang Qing's hand flashed with a trace of light. He glanced over, and his eyes were filled with shock. Wei Wuhui saw his senior brother standing there in a daze, as if he had been struck by lightning. He also had some doubts in his heart, so he walked over to take a look. Immediately, he was also stunned in the distance. "Master has fallen!" With just these 4 words, they had already become sluggish. They really found it hard to believe. How could their master have fallen? As for the reason, it wasn't written on it. It was obvious that the spectators didn't know what was going on, so they didn't report it. This news was also hard for them to believe. Looks like the profoundo world is really going to change. Could it be that it's just as the saying goes, those who are unjust will bring about their own destruction? Wei Wuhui said, the corner of his mouth revealing a trace of self-mockery. Everything had happened too suddenly. They also didn't know what was going on. There were countless doubts in their hearts, but they couldn't get an answer. Wei Wuhui was a little in disbelief. He immediately took out his jade token and found that the news sent back by his informant was only those 4 simple words. Many cultivators didn't know what was going on with Xiao Tianming's death. They only saw that the insufferably arrogant master Zhao's face suddenly twisted ferociously. Before he could say a word, his entire body fell down without any signs of life. No one knew what was going on. They couldn't even understand what had happened. Even Muyang had an incomparably shocked expression. He had not recovered from his shock at all. This time, the situation had changed too quickly. Originally, he thought that he would definitely die this time. He didn't expect the situation to take a turn for the worse. The originally arrogant Zhao Tianming had directly fallen. It could be said that this battle had been full of twists and turns. Every sudden change made people feel that they were caught off guard. It was simply hard to understand what was going on. Everyone was stunned because they saw that after Zhao Tianming fell, there was no sign of life. It was obvious that he had died. As for the real reason, only Xiaoyang knew. The thunder dragon roar of 10,000 poisons had always been just a cover. The real killing move was the poison. After exchanging blows with Zhao Tianming, Xiaoyang clearly knew how terrifying Zhao Tianming's ability was. That was why he concealed this move even more. He didn't stand up for a long time because he needed to wait for the poison to take effect. Moreover, it was silent. When the time was right, he stood up. At that time, the poison would take effect and take his life. If it was a normal time, perhaps Zhao Tianming would have been able to discover it. However, because he was seriously injured in this battle and even paid the price of his spiritual vein, he didn't sense the poison and died silently in the end. Chapter 1962. When the group of Almighties in the profound fighting world saw this scene, they were immediately shocked. They stood there in a daze, unable to believe that what they were seeing was real. It was a fact. 1,000 years ago, the powerhouse had led them all the way and conquered many worlds. Because of this, the profound fighting world had reached a new height and had the prosperity it had today. However, such a war god had died in such a bizarre manner. Moreover, it was so silent that there was not the slightest sign of struggle. It was like a withered leaf that had fallen. However, the fall of this withered leaf was like a stone that stirred up 1,000 ripples. Moreover, it was a stormy sea, causing every cultivator in the profound fighting world to be shocked. Such an outcome was indeed hard for them to imagine. What they had seen before was clearly that person in the outside world whose life was hanging by a thread and was about to fall. Why did the situation change so much in the blink of an eye? It could be said that this matter was puzzling in everyone's heart. No matter how hard they tried, they could not understand. However, some people realized that the sky of the profound fighting world had really changed, and in the future, the profound fighting world might be finished. Especially those people on the sacred Jade Mountain, they had now fallen into grief. After their old ancestor had fallen, they who were used to being arrogant and domineering seemed to have lost their huge protective umbrella. From now on, not to mention the outside world, it was likely that the entire profound fighting world who had been angered would come forward to trample on them. Everything was over. Xiaoyang returned to the flying ship and sat weakly at the bow of the ship, gasping for breath. What had happened just now was really too thrilling. If he was not careful, he might not be able to return and could only die. Fortunately, the other party did not think of and detect his killing move. Otherwise, he might have died together with Zhao Tianming. The exhausted Mu Yang let out a bitter laugh, helplessly. He looked at the rising star beside him, and his heart was filled with admiration. That was an old monster who had affected the profound fighting world for 1,000 years. He was half a step away from that realm and had 4 spirit veins. What kind of terrifying existence was that? Unexpectedly, this kid was actually able to kill him. Although that method was extremely strange and incomprehensible, the result was still good. As for what Xiaoyang's trump card was, Mu Yang still couldn't figure it out. However, he understood another thing, and that was that everyone had their own hidden trump cards. The better they hid them, the more useful they would be in a life and death battle in the future. For example, in the outside world, Zhao Tianming's consummate skills had long been mentioned. But who would have thought that this old monster had secretly cultivated the blood stupa? Moreover, within the profound fighting world, it was likely that there were no more than 3 people who knew about it. If it wasn't for this evil art, Xiaoyang would have won long ago, and it wouldn't have been so strenuous. Looking at the vast, profound fighting world, the smile on Mu Yang's face became even more carefree. No matter how one thought about it, being able to topple this extremely ferocious and insufferably arrogant profound world caused one to feel extremely happy. Because of this, they had paid a very heavy price for invading the profound fighting world. So what if the flowing cloud realm was weak? But it wasn't something that anyone could invade. Since you chose to invade, then you must pay the price. Even if the profound fighting world was incomparably powerful and had a ninth-stage powerhouse with 4 spiritual veins, so what? Didn't that pillar collapse with a bang? Even the ninth-stage cultivators had suffered many losses in this battle. It could be said that after this battle, the profound fighting world's vitality would definitely be greatly damaged. It was likely that within 1,000 years, it would not be able to recover. In fact, the 4 spiritual meridians expert would probably never appear again. Everyone looked at the 2 people from the outside world, standing high above, as if this was their own backyard, and felt incomparable heartache. Since when had their profound fighting world fallen to such a state? This huge contrast was really hard to accept. With so many things happening, it was difficult for them to understand why all of this had happened. It could be said that grief and gloominess had now completely enveloped the profound fighting world. This caused the emotions of everyone present to become extremely complicated. More than that, it was an impact on their beliefs. Even some old people's eyes had become dark and gloomy. Back then, when they were charging together with Zhao Tianming, no matter what kind of problem they faced, they would face it head-on. Moreover, they were the ones who won in the end. But today, why had the situation reversed? Moreover, there were only 2 people on the other side. The smell of blood gradually dissipated, and in this world, only the smoke of the battle remained. Not long after, a young man suddenly stood up. He looked at the airship, his eyes filled with killing intent. "Everyone, are you really willing to be enslaved like this?" The young man shouted loudly. Immediately, countless gazes looked over. "So it's Zhao Kuang!" Someone exclaimed. Zhao Kuang was Zhao Tianming's grandnephew, so his status was naturally extraordinary. In the early years, he had also cultivated in sacred Jade Mountain. After reaching the 9th stage, he had gone down the mountain to take over the position of sect master under Zhao Tianming. Many people understood that although the 3 giants were like the sun in the sky because of their leader's retirement, the next leader would probably be this Zhao Kuang. Because of this series of reasons, Zhao Kuang's appeal had also become extraordinary. Not to mention that he was the most outstanding existence among the younger generation. Just his identity as Zhao Tianming's grandnephew was enough to explain too many things. We are willing to listen to sect master Zhao's orders. For a time, the cultivators present also expressed their attitude one after another, because in their opinion, Zhao Kuang was their new backbone. When Zhao Kuang heard the rising and falling cries, his confidence immediately multiplied. He shouted, "That kid fought with our leader, but he was just an arrow at the end of its flight. He didn't have much strength. Now, let's kill him together and avenge our leader." Avenge. Suddenly, the many cultivators who were originally disheartened became restless because of Zhao Kuang's instigation. It was indeed the case. Just now, Xiaoyang had fought so fiercely that it was obvious to all. If they didn't kill him now, when he regained his senses, the profound fighting world would really be finished. Chapter 1963. The profound fighting world could be said to be in troubled times. Previously, when they went to attack the flowing cloud world, they thought that their opponents were weak, so they only sent a few experts to suppress them. They did not expect that the final result would be the fall of their experts. Behind them, the Almighty of the flowing cloud world rushed over in a rage. Their momentum was abnormally fierce, as if they were ready to destroy the profound fighting world. For a moment, the profound fighting world was naturally furious, but who would have thought that the result of the battle would be the fall of even more experts? Even 2 of the 3 great leaders had died, and the other was able to survive. It was all because the outside world had spared his life and needed his help. Otherwise, he would have been killed long ago. Now, the invincible and invincible Zhao Tianming, Zhao Gongzhu had also fallen. This news could be said to have spread quickly, and immediately, countless people were grieving and resentful. For most of the people in the profound fighting world, this was like a great humiliation that was difficult to accept. There were even some people who were so angry that they suffered internal injuries from holding back their anger. There were even some people who were heartbroken. However, when this news fell into the ears of some of the enslaved people from the outside world, this group of people suddenly became incomparably excited. They knew that the time had come. So what if one of the three great leaders was still alive? Zhao Gongzhu, who was like a god, had already fallen. What else did they have to worry about? Therefore, wherever this news spread, countless people from the outside world chose to unite at this moment. They might not be from the same world, but as long as it was not the profound fighting world, they could be called the most solid allies. They fought side by side and began the most powerful counterattack. There was only one chance. Once the profound fighting world reacted, the experts from all over the world would return. They would also be able to resist, but it would be very difficult. It was not impossible for them to be surrounded and annihilated. Now that the profound fighting world had lost its backbone, it was the perfect time for a breakthrough. The situation in the world could be said to be changing rapidly. Everywhere in the profound fighting world, the flames of war had already been ignited. The flames of war were also spreading at an extremely fast speed. Countless sects in the profound fighting world were also affected because of this. Some of the smaller sects were even wiped out. On top of a tall mountain, Ouyang Cheng looked down at the flames of war that were spreading in front of him. However, he did not move at all. However, within a radius of 1,000 miles around his sect, although such a situation had occurred, it was quickly extinguished. After all, in the face of absolute strength, the disturbance of those people was meaningless. They would only be suppressed with iron and blood. When Wei Wuhui saw this, he couldn't help but frown slightly. He seemed to be heartbroken. The power of the past was like a fleeting cloud, dissipating without a trace. And now, the profound fighting world was bound to pay the price for its previous strength. Now, the enslaved people from the outside world were fighting back crazily. That was to be expected. However, when he saw the flames of war everywhere, he did not feel good. After a long time, Wei Wuhui slowly opened his mouth and said, "Senior brother, are we really not going to send people out to suppress them? Are we going to let these people cause trouble?" When Ouyang Cheng heard this, he helplessly let out a bitter laugh. Naturally, he wanted to, but he didn't dare to act rashly. Now that the situation is not clear, it's best not to act rashly. Furthermore, he wanted to let these sects, who were used to wealth but didn't contribute, experience the flames of war. Otherwise, they will feel that we have taken the lion's share and have not paid the price. Ouyang Cheng said coldly. When Wei Wuhui heard this, he helplessly let out a bitter laugh. He was clearly venting his resentment. But then again, the current situation was indeed not clear. It was hard to say what would happen next. Not to mention that Zhao Gongzhu was killed by the people from the outside world. Even if he died normally, it would lead to chaos. The current profound fighting world could be said to be in a mess. If they were to forcefully suppress it, they would probably get an even stronger counterattack. Remove all defenses. If these people from the outside world are willing to return to their own world, don't stop them. Ouyang Cheng took a deep breath and said. When Wei Wuhui heard this, he was stunned for a moment. Then he recovered and nodded firmly. He understood that it was better to let things go. If those slaves from the outside world were to cause trouble in their own world, it would indeed be a very troublesome matter. But if they left now, the profound fighting world would suffer less losses. It wouldn't be too late to settle the score after everything had settled down. What about Sacred Jade Mountain? Wei Wuhui asked carefully. This was the problem they were most concerned about. It could be said that no matter what happened at Sacred Jade Mountain, it would bring about earth-shaking changes to the profound fighting world. It could be said that that place was the source of all the changes. Ouyang Cheng held his forehead with his hand, seeming to have a headache. This result was something he had never expected. So, how to deal with it next would be a very big problem. Do you dare to make a trip with me to find out the truth? Ouyang Cheng said helplessly. Wei Wuhui smiled and said, "This trip is just to be a fisherman. Naturally, I have to take a look at such a good thing. Who knows, there might be some monstrous opportunity that will fall on my head." When Ouyang Chung heard this, the corners of his mouth revealed a satisfied smile. This junior brother of his had always understood his thoughts. Even now it was no exception. They only needed a glance to understand each other's thoughts. Soon after, the two of them walked side by side towards St. Jade Mountain. They should have gone long ago, but they had been biding their time in their own sect in order to deal with all changes. Now that the situation had turned into a mess, he naturally had to go and clean it up. Perhaps if the conclusion this time was done well, then Ouyang Chung would become the next lord on sacred Jade Mountainside, because Xiao Quan had become the new backbone. After a series of impassioned speeches, the flames in everyone's hearts had already been ignited. In the blink of an eye, it had formed a great momentum. They wanted that outsider to die. They wanted to avenge their leader and kill this enemy of the profound fighting world. Only then would they be safe. Anger and hatred caused many people to gradually lose their minds. What they were thinking now was very simple. Chapter 1964. Now, Zhao Kuang was filled with indignation and righteousness, as if everything he had done was for the sake of the entire profound Dou world. From an outsider's point of view, they would probably think that the profound Dou world was being invaded and that they were the victims. It was as if everything had been reversed, and they had become the victims instead. If others saw this, they would probably be dumbfounded and unable to understand what was going on. Looking at the aggressive appearance of this group of people, Mu Yang smiled bitterly and helplessly. He did not have much strength left. However, it would not be a problem to drag these two down with him before he died. However, if they really died in this place, what would happen to the flowing cloud world in the future? It could be said that the two of them represented the strongest battle strength of the flowing cloud world, and they could not afford to make the slightest mistake. If they died, they would probably face an extremely terrifying counterattack from the profound Dou world in the future. At that time, the situation would become very bad. Mu Yang's heart was also somewhat gloomy. When he had set off from the flowing cloud world, he had only thought about how to take revenge and had neglected too many things. Although they had achieved their goal, it was still extremely difficult for them to kill their way out of the encirclement of so many powerhouses. Immediately, Mu Yang's gaze fell on the young man who had come with him. Would he be able to create another miracle? Mu Yang could not wait to see what would happen. However, he sighed helplessly in his heart. No matter what, Xiaoyang was only one person. He was not a god, so how could he create miracles? In the battle just now, it could be said that he had performed exceptionally. If he forced it, it would not be of much use. After all, there was a limit to everyone's energy and ability. Looking at Xiaoyang again, he did not seem to be worried at all. He was lying there leisurely and carefree. It was as if he did not know that he was in danger. This state made Mu Yang a little confused. He did not know what this young man was planning. Perhaps it was because he had seen too many dangerous situations and had long since disregarded his own life and death, so he was completely unconcerned. It's just death. No matter how much you worry, it doesn't seem to change the situation. It's better to accept it calmly. Do you still have more explosive pills? Mu Yang's expression hardened as he asked resolutely. Although they seemed to have completely fallen into a hopeless situation, as long as he had an eruption pill, he would be able to recover his strength once again. In that case, killing his way out and leaving the profound Dou world would naturally not be a problem. As long as Ouyang Chung, the only remaining one of the three giants, did make a move, the chances of them killing their way out were extremely high. Although Mu Yang was only in the upper tier of the 9th rank, he had a high-grade saint weapon in his hand. The power of the Zhuyan token was extraordinary. Otherwise, how could he possibly break the Jade Saint Killing Heart formation? It could be said that, to a large extent, he had relied on Zhu Yanling's strength to barely achieve this. Xiaoyang shook his head and said, Although I still have a lot, I can't give them to you." When these words came out, Mu Yang could not help but frown. What did he mean by that? Since he had them, why not take them out? "Your current state is not suitable for you to take any more explosive pills. Otherwise, I'm afraid your cultivation level will regress." Xiaoyang saw that Mu Yang still had doubts and patiently explained. Hearing this, Mu Yang let out a bitter laugh. Now, they were worried about life and death. How could they still care about the regress of their cultivation level, even though it would be extremely difficult for him to recover in the future? He no longer cared about it. From Mu Yang's point of view, he felt that being able to cultivate to the 8th rank of King Wu was already the limit. However, because he had met Xiaoyang, he had undergone an earth-shattering change. He had even broken through to the upper tier of the 9th rank and understood the profound meaning of King Wu's cultivation level. Mu Yang even felt that he should have died in the Tianhe realm. However, because of Xiaoyang's appearance, his life was saved. He was not even tempted by the high-grade saint weapon. Today, even if he returned his life to him, so what? Moreover, that was the worst-case scenario. It was already not easy to keep his life. Therefore, there was no point in thinking so much now. It's not important. As long as I can protect you and kill our way out, that's enough. Mu Yang said very seriously. He had already accepted life and death. Now, all he thought about was how to give back to his world. In his eyes, this young man was the hope of the future. He could lead the drifting cloud realm to a more prosperous place. Xiaoyang shook his head and said, "I don't want to give it to you because there's no need. They're just a bunch of small fries. What's there to talk about?" When these words came out, Mu Yang was stunned for a moment. Then he laughed. Most of the cultivators present were of the 9th rank, and most of them were of the 8th rank. If it was under normal circumstances, the two of them together would naturally not take them seriously. However, things were different now. Things could not be said to be too absolute. After all, many things were not so simple. Their current state was just too terrible. It would be too difficult for them to fight. Mu Yang seemed to have realized something as well. He looked at Xiaoyang in disbelief, the young man from the younger generation. Could it be that he still had the ability to continue fighting, or that he could easily take care of them? Was that why he treated them like small fries? "There's not much difference between a small fries and a group of small fries to me," Xiaoyang said indifferently. Mu Yang naturally believed this. However, Xiaoyang was lying on the ground and did not even seem to have the ability to stand up. Wasn't this a little too much? It was like a fantasy story. As for how much strength Xiaoyang still had, and whether he had held back, Mu Yang did not know. However, the current situation was not optimistic. Therefore, changes had to be made. At this moment, the crowd of onlookers slowly came over with Zhao Kuang. Every single one of them was filled with killing intent. The two outsiders who had charged in had given them too much humiliation. Therefore, they were very unwilling to accept this and wanted to wash away this humiliation. If the tiger was full of energy, they naturally would not have dared to attack it. However, the tiger was already exhausted. Naturally, they could kill it. Chapter 1965. Sacred Jade Mountain was in a state of grief because of the great ancestor's death. Everyone was worried about what would happen to them in the future. There were also some people who hated the outsider who had killed their great ancestor. Even though some people were thinking about revenge, they knew very well that even the insufferably arrogant great ancestor had fallen. If they went up, it would be no different from sending themselves to their deaths. Therefore, what should they do next became a question in the hearts of most people. Even though they were grieving, what could they do? The great ancestor had already fallen. They who had lost their protection naturally needed to continue living and survive. However, how to find a way out became a huge problem. Soon, some people discovered that the young master from back then was now rushing over with a large number of powerhouses, looking as if he wanted to avenge the great ancestor. Suddenly, many people's hearts became a lot more excited. They also saw hope because of this. Since there was no way to retreat, why not join forces with the young master and kill the outsider together? With one person having such thoughts and actions, countless people began to respond to him. At this moment, all the powerhouses above the 8th level rushed into the sky, ready to join the main force and fight to the death with the two outsiders. Although Sacred Jade Mountain was the strongest place in the profound fighting world, the number of powerhouses that could be brought out was very limited. Due to the warlike nature of the profound fighting world, as long as one was a good fighter, they would go out to make a name for themselves. Those who stayed behind would only do some daily rough work. In addition, some powerhouses had died in the previous battle. Now, the only ones that could be brought out on Sacred Jade Mountain were merely 3 King Wu 8th level powerhouses. Seeing that the 3 of them had taken the lead to rise up but did not attack immediately, Xiaoyang only glanced at them indifferently and did not care about anything. These people were just trying to curry favor with those in power. Now, they had only appeared to strengthen their prestige. They probably would not dare to do anything. At the very least, before anyone took the lead, they would not dare to act rashly. After all, once they took the lead, they did not know how much strength the opponent had reserved. When the time came, they would face a fatal disaster. Who didn't want to live? They didn't dare to act rashly in this kind of battle situation where they had no confidence in winning. They were afraid that the slightest mistake would ruin their great future. Looking at Xiao Kuang's side, they weren't advancing very quickly. They seemed to be moving steadily. At the same time, everyone's attention was on the airship. They were carefully observing the changes on it, fearing that they would miss something. After all, for them, a moment of carelessness could ruin their bright future. Therefore, under such circumstances, they naturally had to be more cautious. They did not dare to be careless at all. In particular, Xiao Kuang's heart was beating like a drum. Although he looked very calm, his heart was already in turmoil. Even their leader, Zhao Tianming, had fallen in this place. What else was impossible? However, he did not know whether the other party was just an arrow at the end of its flight or did not have the ability to fight again. Therefore, he had to be careful. Soon, the distance between the two sides was only 5 miles. At this time, Zhao Kuang also stopped and did not continue to move forward. Arrogant bandit, why aren't you coming forward to kill me? Zhao Kuang stood on the spot and shouted. Zhao Kuang looked even more high-spirited now, as if the current him was already high and mighty, and the profound battle world had become his personal property. Even the lives of others were in his hands. Mu Yang sat on the bow of the airship, stroking his vermilion flame token. If something unexpected really happened, he could only do his best to kill a few more people to be his scapegoat. Xiaoyang was still lying there with a look of indifference on his face. He really wasn't in the mood to listen carefully to the clamor of these small characters. However, this scene caused some subtle changes in the mentality of most of the cultivators in the profound battle world. Because in their eyes, since the other party didn't speak, it meant that the other party didn't have the ability to continue fighting. This was definitely good news for them. Although the other party killed Zhao Tianming, they were also in an awkward situation where their lives were hanging by a thread. Otherwise, with these people's ability, would they be able to endure their provocation? Zhao Kuang's heart also became very calm because of this. The current situation was also what he wanted to see. Sure enough, everything was as he had expected. Everything was under control. It could be said that victory was in the bag. Zhao Kuang's heart began to be unable to suppress the excitement in his heart. Bastard, why aren't you coming out to die? Great God, Zhao Kuang shouted, and even pulled out a large saber, looking very fierce. Seeing the other party's satisfied look, Mu Yang was very unhappy in his heart. He slowly stood up, and his killing intent spread out at the same time. However, because the power was weak, the power he emitted was also very weak. Immediately, the other people also began to clamor. Because the other party didn't have much ability now, it was a good opportunity to kill him. Xiaoyang couldn't bear to listen any longer. He stood up shakily with his sword in hand, looking dispirited and dispirited. However, this action left some people speechless. Although the other party was on the verge of collapse, he was still an existence that was almost at the peak of Kingwu and couldn't be underestimated. If you want to live, hurry up and leave now. Otherwise, don't blame my sword for being merciless. Xiaoyang said indifferently. When they heard the demon-like young man speak so weakly, they were shocked and bewildered. However, they were certain that Xiaoyang was already very weak, and now was a great opportunity to kill him. Zhao Kuang was also aware of this. He felt that if the other party really had terrifying fighting strength, he naturally wouldn't threaten them and would directly kill them. Huh, do you really think we're scared? Die! Zhao Kuang shouted, and directly rushed out with his large saber toward Xiaoyang. Xiaoyang shook his head and said, I gave you a chance, but you insisted on seeking death. What else can I do? After saying that, the Thunderfire Divine sword in Xiaoyang's hand flew out. Chapter 1966. As soon as the divine sword appeared, the sound of it breaking through the air rang out continuously. In fact, the might of the lightning fire burst forth once again. That terrifying aura also erupted once again, as if it hadn't suffered any damage at all. In an instant, the thoughts in many people's hearts changed again. Many people felt that the other party was just an arrow at the end of its flight and could be easily killed. However, this time, the sword had already exceeded their expectations. The power of this sword was truly terrifying. Suddenly, Zhao Kuang's heart was filled with shock. He really couldn't understand how that person still had such tyrannical strength, and he had already clearly felt the terror of this sword. As the person who was targeted, he naturally understood how terrifying the power of this sword was. If he was hit, he might be seriously injured. Those who were originally clamoring also fell silent once again. They originally wanted to beat the dog that was down, but they realized that they were the dogs. The other party didn't bother with them, but they still barked endlessly, causing the other party to be annoyed and angry. Now, Zhao Kuang could only hope that this sword was an arrow at the end of its flight. As long as he could block it, then he could still kill the other party. Didn't they say that they would threaten the other party with words when they were weak? The other party's momentum could be said to be completely different. Zhao Kuang didn't understand what was going on. However, an arrow on the bowstring had to be released. Moreover, he had already charged, and there was no turning back. If he retreated now, he would probably become the laughingstock of the entire profound fighting world. He didn't want to face such a situation. At that time, not to mention humiliating his family's reputation, even his status and influence would decline because of it. Xiaoyang saw that the kid didn't have the slightest intention of retreating. Instead, he looked like he was ready to fight to the death. This was somewhat interesting. However, since he was courting death, Xiaoyang would naturally fulfill his wish. In the next moment, the divine sword suddenly shifted and pierced through Zhao Kuang's body at an extremely tricky angle. Suddenly, Zhao Kuang's body was directly stuck on the spot, and a painful expression appeared on his face. His internal organs had all been injured by the sword. Even one of his spiritual veins had suffered some damage because of this, causing him to feel extremely uncomfortable. As for the power within his body, it began to riot. As expected, he was just an arrow at the end of its flight. Zhao Kuang thought in his heart. He felt that victory was already in his grasp. As long as he slashed with his saber, the outcome would be set. However, when he saw his opponent move his finger, he felt a sharp pain in his body. He couldn't help but tremble again. How was that possible? All of a sudden, countless questions surfaced in Zhao Kuang's mind. No matter what, he was still in existence at the peak of the 9th stage. Why was he unable to protect himself in front of this young man? What was the reason for this? There were too many questions in Zhao Kuang's heart, but he couldn't find any answers. Countless bolts of lightning and flames transformed into sword qi, constantly grinding away at the life force in his body, causing him unbearable pain. Xiaoyang was still expressionless. He only moved his finger, controlling his weapon to rapidly grind away at his opponent's life force. At this moment, the onlookers subconsciously held their breaths. They felt that they had made a wrong decision and had been instigated by Zhao Kuang, thinking that they could clean up the mess. However, who would have thought that the situation would turn out like this? It could be said that no one had expected this situation, and they all felt extremely helpless in their hearts. Everything had happened and changed too quickly. Even the 3 people who had rushed out of sacred Jade Mountain were trembling uncontrollably. They were also glad that they hadn't acted rashly. Otherwise, they would have been cold corpses. Even Zhao Kuang, who was at the peak of the 9th stage, couldn't fight back and could only be killed. What were 8th stage cultivators to him? Mu Yang turned to look at this rising star, and the corners of his mouth couldn't help but twitch. He felt that everything that was happening before him was unreal. Could it be that he was really a monster? Furthermore, the spiritual energy in his body was inexhaustible and inexhaustible. At the very least, this move was very shocking. No wonder Xiaoyang said that there was no need, because even if he was in such a state, he could still control the situation, so there was no need to worry. What had seemed like a clear and bright situation had once again become treacherous and unpredictable. Many people felt that they were in a dilemma, and their hearts were constantly beating like drums. They didn't know what they should do next. Not long after, the Thunderfire Divine sword returned to its owner's hand. As for Zhao Kuang, he had already become a corpse, powerlessly falling to the ground. He looked very miserable. Even until his death, Zhao Kuang still couldn't understand why he had to pay such a heavy price when everything was going according to his plan. Without even the slightest ability to resist, he had lost his life. After the leader died, the entire Profound Do world became anxious once again. The people who were confronting him were also very frightened. They couldn't understand how things had developed to this point. Could it be that their previous thoughts were wrong from the beginning? The current situation could be said to be dangerous. They didn't know if that person would be angry because of this and start to inhumanely slaughter them. But they still prayed in their hearts, hoping that they could escape this calamity. Mu Yang was now very happy. Since his companions were strong enough, he naturally didn't need to worry too much. Therefore, he became very arrogant because of this. His originally dispirited expression was swept away once again at this moment. If it wasn't because he really didn't have much strength in his body, Mu Yang would have rushed up and killed these detestable people. If you don't want to die, get lost immediately. Otherwise, you will die. Of course, you can have the same thoughts as that corpse and try to see how much strength I have left. However, whether or not I will still let you go when the time comes, I will have to think about it carefully. Xiaoyang said casually, as if everything was as light as the wind and clouds, as if nothing was important at all. Chapter 1967. These words were light as a feather, but they caused people's minds to be shaken, and they even felt fear and dread. Previously, they were led by Zhao Kuang and thought that the outsider was already exhausted and no longer had the ability to fight. However, Zhao Kuang's death followed. This was enough to explain a lot of things. The blood-covered young man did seem to have suffered a great loss and was no longer as strong as before. But so what? He still had the absolute power to suppress them. Dealing with them was as easy as chopping melons and vegetables. If they weren't in existence like Zhao Tianming, they would be courting death if they wanted to fight him. It was meaningless. Although some people had many thoughts in their hearts, the young man had gone through such a great battle and hadn't rested at all. It wouldn't be easy for him to recover. Now was the time to chase after him. Perhaps he could even kill him. However, no one was willing to be a stepping stone and pave the way for someone else, because no one knew how much strength that person still had and how many Zhao Kuangs he could kill before he was truly powerless. This was a huge problem that caused many people to tremble in fear. Under unknown circumstances, everyone would take the lead, just like when they had just stepped into the Profound Do world. There were countless people who wanted to annihilate them. However, At this moment, they had a whole new understanding of the strength of these two people. This also caused them to be afraid, and they were not willing to be the ones to die. If they could live well, who would die for no reason? The Thunder Fire Divine sword had returned to Xiaoyang's hand, and he still had a leisurely look on his face. He seemed very relaxed, as if he didn't care about all of this, seeing the different expressions on those people's faces or the feeling of danger. Even though they were furious, they didn't dare to take the lead. It was a little funny. Everyone had different thoughts. That could be said to be a very normal thing. As for what they were thinking, it was all strange and bizarre. Everyone's thoughts were different. At this time, some people were already thinking of retreating, because in their opinion, the situation was already over, and they didn't dare to die generously. It was meaningless to continue waiting here. Every once in a while, that person's strength would definitely recover a little. In other words, the longer they delayed, the more the other party would slowly recover his strength. At that time, if they were hot-headed and angry, they would really be courting death. Mu Yang looked at the strange expressions on those people's faces and felt very comfortable in his heart. All along, these people had been very arrogant. He didn't expect them to act so arrogantly today. It was very funny. Suddenly, Xiaoyang furrowed his brows. He could feel two extremely powerful auras heading towards him at high speed. Xiaoyang, on the other hand, held the Thunder Fire Divine sword in his hand. Since this was the profound fighting world, those who came could only be enemies. As for how to deal with them, it became a problem. Although Xiaoyang appeared to be calm and composed, he was naturally very clear about his own condition. If more powerhouses came, he might not be able to deal with them. After all, it wasn't a problem to scare these ordinary people in front of him. The human heart was complicated. Under these circumstances, no one was willing to die, so no one dared to make a move. Very quickly, Mu Yang also sensed the auras rapidly approaching. He frowned because of this, appearing very worried. As for the method behind this, he had figured it out a little. At the same time, he also felt that if something really happened, it would be difficult to say what the outcome would be. As such, the most important thing right now was to play safe. However, the mutation happened and when it happened, who could guard against it? As such, Mu Yang looked at Xiaoyang again. Even if something unexpected happened, they could still use the explosion pill to kill their way out. There was no need to worry about their lives. However, they still needed to think about how to kill their way out. After all, it wouldn't be easy to kill their way out. Once they started, those cultivators who were scared out of their wits would most likely gather in the shortest amount of time and attack them. It could be said that these problems were existences that they had to guard against. They had to be careful and not make the slightest mistake. Not long later, the two auras had already charged over. When they were 3 miles away from Xiaoyang and Mu Yang, they stopped. They were none other than Ouyang Cheng and Wei Wuhui. When the crowd saw Ouyang Cheng appear, they were all shocked. Although they were unable to shake the existence of a peak martial king with their abilities, this big shot was definitely capable of doing so. Although they had lost before, they were both peak King Wu. If they fought like this, it was hard to say who would win. Everyone had different thoughts. At the same time, they were prepared to watch a good show. Although Ouyang Cheng's actions were disdainful, after seeing his opponent's abilities, they knew how helpless he was. If Ouyang Cheng could turn the situation around, then he would be the greatest contributor in the profound fighting world. After Ouyang Cheng arrived, he began to carefully size up the situation of the two people. He was very meticulous. As for Wei Wuhui, he had a lazy look and seemed very casual. Being sized up by Ouyang Cheng in this manner, the corners of Xiaoyang's mouth curled up slightly. The lightning fire divine sword in his hand released a sword aura, giving off an inviolable appearance. It was as though it was about to leave his hand in the next moment. Suddenly, Ouyang Cheng's brows furrowed slightly because he felt that the sword qi was indeed very powerful. And this sword was not the lower sacred grade magic weapon from before. It was a middle grade magic weapon. For a moment, Ouyang Cheng's heart was filled with mixed feelings. There were too many things about this young man that he couldn't see through. He didn't know what kind of ability he had. It made people speechless. On the other hand, Wei Wuhui's expression slowly changed from casual to serious. This was because he knew about the situation here. But now that he saw it with his own eyes, he could feel the danger in it. You came at the right time, and the timing of the fire was very accurate. Now that you are here to be a fisherman, you can indeed reap a lot of benefits. Xiaoyang smiled indifferently. Chapter 1968. At this moment, Xiaoyang was still as calm as ever, as if he had turned a deaf ear to the impending crisis. Xiaoyang was naturally very clear about Ouyang Cheng's thoughts and knew what he was thinking. It was very easy to understand and control the mentality of these people. Since they were able to do this, it was clear how scheming they were. If they had not fought before, perhaps Ouyang Cheng would have made a move. However, he was also in existence who was scared out of his wits. So how could he dare to act rashly? Therefore, Xiaoyang could be said to have grasped this point and knew what he should do. Seeing that the other party had seen through his thoughts, Ouyang Cheng's heart suddenly thumped, and he was terrified. He did want to come here to kill Xiaoyang and turn the situation around. At that time, he would also become the second supreme master of the profound fighting world. However, Xiaoyang did not leave immediately, as if he was waiting for him here. Could it be that this guy really had the ability to deal with him, so he was waiting here fearlessly? For a moment, Ouyang Cheng's thoughts were also spinning at an extremely fast speed. Many thoughts appeared in his mind, and he began to explain himself. However, in such a hurry, it was very difficult to get a definite answer. Wei Wuhui also looked very serious because he realized that this situation was more tragic than they had imagined. Even whether the two of them had the ability to clean up this mess was a huge problem. As the saying goes, plan before acting. They had analyzed the situation very thoroughly and even grasped every aspect to the extreme. However, man proposes, God disposes. When the group of people in the profound fighting world saw that Ouyang Cheng had no intention of making a move, some ideas gradually appeared in their minds. However, those ideas were a little unrealistic and could not lead to a good ending, because this confrontation made many people feel that it was very strenuous. If they wanted to fight, they would fight. If they wanted to retreat, they would retreat. Now that they were in a deadlock, what was the point? Mu Yang looked at this group of people with different thoughts and found it funny. Under such circumstances, it was only natural for them to join forces against the enemy. However, the profound fighting world seemed to be different. These people placed their own interests more important. They were afraid that they would suffer a loss if they made the first move, so they did not have that kind of courage. However, to Mu Yang, this was extremely beneficial, and even extremely beneficial. Since they were so afraid, they didn't dare to act rashly, and they would be able to get through this hurdle. Mu Yang looked at the person beside him, and the smile on his face grew wider. Whether it was in terms of skill, means, or scheming, they could all be said to be top-notch existences. With his leadership, how could the flowing cloud world not be able to become a first-rate world in the future? Fellow Taoist Xiao, you've misunderstood, Ouyang Cheng said awkwardly, appearing very humble. Xiao Yang laughed disdainfully, as if to say that he had already seen through her thoughts. There was no point in pretending in front of him. When Ouyang Cheng saw the smile, he seemed to understand the meaning behind it. He laughed awkwardly. Ouyang Cheng still didn't know what the current situation was like. He also didn't know what Xiao Yang's current state was and whether he could defeat him. Whether or not he could kill him was the thing that Ouyang Cheng was most worried about. This was because, in his opinion, if he succeeded, he would be the sole ruler of the profound fighting world. If he failed, he would die. Even his sect and family would be implicated and cease to exist. As such, Ouyang Cheng had to carefully consider the many benefits involved. He was afraid that he would take a wrong step and fall into a bottomless abyss. What did I misunderstand about you? Xiao Yang laughed. Ouyang Cheng frowned slightly. He didn't know how to continue. On the other hand, the other party's serious appearance was indeed a little scary. Under such circumstances, he could still joke so calmly. It could be seen how terrifying this person's temperament was. Of course, temperament was only part of the reason. More importantly, one needed to have strength to be able to cultivate such a mentality. To tell you the truth, I have exhausted all my strength in the battle with Zhao Tianming. There is no way I can continue fighting. Of course, it is not a problem to deal with a small fry like Zhao Kuang. If you take action, I might not be able to defeat him. Xiao Yang said with a cheeky smile. These words were said as if he was chatting about daily life. It couldn't be any more normal. However, countless thoughts flashed through Ouyang Cheng's mind. Was this the real situation? Or was it deliberately mystifying? Or was it a trap? Therefore, this also caused Ouyang Cheng to be uncertain in his heart. He didn't know which side to lean towards and how to make a choice. If he made the wrong choice, it would be difficult for him to escape death. Wei Wuhui also felt a huge pressure because he couldn't see through this young man. It seemed that he didn't know what to say, which made him feel guilty. The main thing was that the other party was too clear about their mentality. How could he not be prepared? However, there was also another possibility, which was that he was purposely scaring them so that they wouldn't dare to make a move because of their heavy suspicions. This way, he could ensure that he would be safe and get through this period of weakness. Previously, Wei Wuhui had also thought of disassociating himself from this matter and probing on his own. However, in that person's eyes, those below the pinnacle were all ants. It was likely that he wouldn't be able to find out the real situation. He might even anger that person and cause even more serious consequences. Ouyang Cheng also looked towards Wei Wuhui for help. He wanted to know what choice he should make. However, the result didn't satisfy him. Right now, it was as if they were on a mountain of blades and a sea of fire. If they weren't careful, they might fall and be consigned to eternal damnation. Therefore, on this matter, if they were a little more stable, there wouldn't be any mistakes. After watching for a long time, Muyang also felt that it was boring. However, he didn't dare to reveal anything. After all, at this time, if there was a flaw, it would be over. Something big would happen. Looks like you don't have the guts to make a move. Then I might as well tell you that if I let you stay, I can naturally kill you. It's that simple. How's the matter of the compensation I asked you to prepare? Xiao Yang said. Chapter 1969. When he said this, Xiao Yang no longer had the cheeky smile from before and became much more serious. It could be said that his trip this time was indeed to take revenge for the flowing cloud world, but at the same time he also wanted to collect some benefits. After all, this trip could not be in vain. Mu Yang, who was at the side, was shocked. Right now it was already a problem for them to protect themselves, but this guy actually wanted to pressure them step by step and ask for compensation. Could it be that he was really not afraid that this group of people would do something desperate and destroy jade and common stone? When the cultivators of the profound Do world heard this, the anger in their hearts rose once again, but they quickly suppressed it, because they knew that if they showed up now, they would be courting death. That demon was not someone they could provoke. When Ouyang Cheng heard this, he heaved a sigh of relief and said, I don't know how to prepare, so I came to ask for your opinion. The current Ouyang Cheng had also become respectful. Being bullied like this, he did not have the slightest bit of anger and was very flattering. The people of the profound fighting world had always bullied others and were used to seeing too many things. Of course, they were arrogant and despotic, but at the same time, they were also quite respectful of strength. When they met someone stronger than them, they did not dare to resist in the slightest. They had already resisted before, and those people had undoubtedly died. Therefore, they were obedient and did not dare to have any groundless thoughts. Even if they did not dare to show it. Wei Wuhui's heart was incomparably helpless. But under such circumstances, what could he do? They could not change anything, and could only watch everything happen without being able to resist. At the same time, he was also mocking himself. It had always been the profound fighting world who robbed others. Who would have thought that one day they would also be the ones being robbed? 5 Saint grade middle rank magic artifacts. 10 Saint grade low rank magic artifacts. As for all kinds of heaven and earth treasures, there are no less than 100 of them. The quality can't be bad if I find out that you are using shoddy goods. You will fall by one more realm. Xiaoyang said with a smile. When these words came out, Ouyang Cheng's brows were almost twisted into a fried dough twist. Asking for these things was like asking for an exorbitant price. It was almost asking for more than half of the profound fighting world's wealth. If that was the case, how could they afford it? Furthermore, the other party didn't seem to have said anything yet. Bring over 100 bottles of top-quality pills from your profound fighting world. As for the rest, I'll let you know once I've thought it through, Xiaoyang said with a smile. Ouyang Qing furrowed his brows and nodded. He could also feel what kind of predicament he was about to face this time. At the very least, the compensation this time was enough to make the profound fighting world suffer for 100 years. The savings that he had accumulated over the past few hundred years would most likely be used up because of this battle. What's more, what the other party said was only temporary. I think you can accept it. After all, in the current profound fighting world, the peak of the 9th stage is the only one. It won't be a problem for you to become the second leader. The corners of Xiaoyang's mouth curled up slightly. Ouyang Qing only smiled and agreed. Even though he was dissatisfied in his heart, he did not dare to express it. After the other cultivators of the profound fighting world heard this, it could be said that they were filled with anger, but they quickly restrained themselves. Since this outsider had said that he wanted Ouyang Qing to be the leader, it was obvious that he was also a puppet-like existence. If they wanted to cause trouble, they would probably anger this outsider. As for what methods you use to suppress them, I don't care. I only care about what I get and whether I'm satisfied. Do you understand? Xiaoyang said solemnly. Ouyang Qing also nodded solemnly and said, This subordinate understands. Now, Ouyang Qing had already made his position very clear. He also knew that since he had no intention of fighting, he could only be a puppet for the time being. Although it was very sullen, at least he was the leader of the profound fighting world. In this storm, although the profound fighting world was seriously damaged, Ouyang Qing had benefited. Although there would still be losses, he could use various methods to make up for it in the future. If there's nothing else, go and prepare first. I still want to look at the scenery here. Xiaoyang said with a smile. Ouyang Qing frowned slightly and said, This is this subordinate's junior brother, Wei Wuhui. I'll let him stay to serve you, so that he can inform you in time if there's anything. How about it? Wei Wuhui was stunned for a moment and immediately understood the meaning behind it. He stayed as an informant and wanted to find out the real situation of Xiaoyang. What's the point of having a man here? Find a few pretty girls, Xiaoyang said coldly. Ouyang Qing was stunned for a moment and immediately cupped his hands and said, Understood. After saying a few words, Ouyang Qing left with Wei Wuhui and did not dare to stay for a moment. As for the surrounding cultivators, they scattered and did not dare to stay at all. Even if they had complaints in their hearts, they did not dare to say it out loud. After seeing everyone leave, Xiaoyang secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, everything was under control and there were no more disturbances. Otherwise, it wouldn't be easy to find a capable and obedient dog. It was naturally good to be able to solve the problem easily. There was no need to worry too much, and there was no need to do too much. All he had to do was wait. After a long while, Muyang sat on the ground weakly. He was very nervous just now, but because he was afraid of exposing himself, he had no choice but to be careful and pretend to be calm. You little brat, you really know how to scheme. You could scare those cowards away like that. Muyang said in disbelief. Xiaoyang smiled faintly and did not say anything. As for whether or not Muyang's words would be overheard, he didn't care at all. Even if Ouyang Qing came back with his men, Xiaoyang could still handle it. He still had a trump card that he had not used, and that was Xiao Hua. Trump cards were like that. They had to be kept and not be used if possible. If they were exposed, or if someone figured it out and found a way to deal with it, it would be a nightmare. You really are a monster. You can even kill Zhao Tianming, who has 4 spirit veins. Is there anything you can't do? Mu Yang asked curiously. Xiao Yang smiled faintly and said, Zhao Tianming's strength is only SOO. Even if he has 1 more spiritual vein, it will not change him much. He is just an ordinary person. Mu Yang was speechless. Chapter 1970. In the profound fighting world, shocking news continued to spread one after another. Countless people were shocked by it. For a time, countless disputes emerged on this land at the same time. It could be said that the world was in chaos. Everyone was fighting for their own ideas. No one retreated. In order to return to their hometowns or restore their worlds, they seemed to have disregarded their own lives and did not care about these problems. What they wanted was to overthrow this bloody and violent world. With 2 of the 3 great leaders gone, even their common master, Zhao Tianming, had fallen. Under such a situation, how could they not rise up and resist? Moreover, the profound fighting world had also lost many experts because of this storm. This was also their chance to turn things around. Soon, another piece of news spread. As the only remaining one of the 3 great leaders, Ouyang Cheng had no choice but to bow down under the pressure of the mysterious person. He began to pay tribute to ensure his safety. There were even rumors that the mysterious person had the intention to support Ouyang Cheng as the 2nd common master of the profound fighting world, turning him into a puppet to control the profound fighting world. This news made those who were enslaved feel very happy. It had always been the profound fighting world that had been conquering other worlds and turning them into their own subordinates, oppressing them. Who would have thought that one day their identity would also be the enslaved party? It could be said that the wicked would be dealt with by the wicked. After Ouyang Cheng took over, the first order he issued was to open the door wide. If people from other worlds were willing to return, they would not stop them. However, if they wanted to continue fighting, then he would definitely deploy experts to suppress them. After this news spread, many people from the outside world immediately left because they knew very well that their strongest cultivator was only King Wu, who was at the 8th level. If they fought with the profound fighting world, they were still lacking. Now that there was a chance to leave, they naturally could not hesitate. Previously, they had caused a ruckus because all eyes and attention were on the sacred Jade Mountain. They had such an opportunity. But now the battle at the sacred Jade Mountain had subsided and the experts from various worlds were on their way back. If they really arrived, only death would await them. The insightful cultivators all left, while those who were still obsessed with destroying the profound battle world stayed behind. However, when most of the people left, they also felt what it meant to be weak, and they were quickly suppressed. However, there were still some very tenacious cultivators who were constantly engaging in guerrilla warfare. They wanted to continue to struggle at death's door in this way, or they wanted to obtain more things in this chaotic situation. That was why they were unwilling to leave. After issuing this order to quell the scourge of these outsiders, Ouyang Cheng brought his capable subordinates and went to the various sects in the profound fighting world to make them bow down to him. After all, it was almost impossible for Ouyang Cheng to pay such a huge amount of compensation with his sect's wealth. Therefore, no sect in the profound Do world was innocent after their defeat in this battle. They also needed to pay the corresponding price. After all, everyone had a share of the meat back then. Some sects even tried to get an extra share. Now they naturally needed to spit out some of it. Ever since Zhao Tianming unified the profound fighting world, it had always been a whole. Of course, that was only under the huge benefits. At this point, if they were asked to pay some price, they would probably fall apart. Ouyang Cheng naturally thought about this point and understood it very well. Therefore, he personally made a trip. If they didn't listen to him, he could only suppress them with force. It could be said that Ouyang Cheng was now the top fighting force in the profound fighting world. He was the only peak 9th rank cultivator. In addition, he also brought a few advanced stage cultivators. Which sect could compete with him? In this chaotic situation, there was no second Zhao Kuang to emerge. Therefore, Ouyangqing took away many things wherever he went. However, he didn't go too far. If he angered all the sects when Xiaoyang left, he was afraid that he would face a situation where he was surrounded by enemies. For a time, the powerful, profound fighting world also weakened at an extremely fast speed in this short period of time. 2 days had passed, and the flames of war that had spread all over the place had gradually died down. Under the great change in people's hearts, the huge, profound fighting world also showed signs of collapse. Even the neighboring worlds had raised their armies and killed the masters from the profound fighting world who were stationed in their own worlds as they began to plot a counterattack. However, when those worlds knew that one of the 3 great leaders, Ouyangqing, had become a puppet and that the stronger, mysterious person had stayed in the profound fighting world, they didn't act rashly. If that person was even more ruthless and greedy than Zhao Tianming, then their actions would be akin to digging their own graves. After all, as strong as the profound fighting world, they had to use the power of the entire world to quell the anger of that almighty person. And even if they joined forces, there was still a difference between them and the profound fighting world that had been dominating for thousands of years. As the person who had stirred up several nearby worlds and caused them to become turbulent, he was very relaxed. A flying ship that had been bombarded until it was completely broken was slowly flying high in the sky, as if it was taking a stroll in its own backyard. It looked very leisurely. Wherever this flying ship went, it could be said that there was no fear. Regardless of whether a place was a taboo place of a certain sect, it didn't think much about it. If it saw a place with good scenery or some strange place, the flying ship would stop for a while and observe. Xiaoyang, on the other hand, was lying on a rattan chair and enjoying the warm sunlight. He felt very comfortable. Beside Xiaoyang, there were 2 women. One was wearing a green robe and the other was wearing a red dress. One was youthful and beautiful, while the other was full of charm. These 2 women were called Lu He and Hong Yi. They were the maids sent by Ouyangqing to serve Xiaoyang. Lu He and Hong Yi should not be underestimated. Although the 2 of them were only women, their strength was not ordinary. They were both King Wu's 8th level existences. In fact, Hong Yi was only a short distance away from the 9th level. As for these 2, to put it nicely, they were maids, but in fact they were spies. Chapter 1971. How could Xiaoyang not know the purpose of these 2 women? Of course, he was well aware of this, but he didn't refuse because this was a scheme to begin with. If he did not want them, Ouyangqing would probably think that he was a lamp that had run out of oil. It was very normal for him to suddenly change his attitude. So, after weighing the pros and cons, Xiaoyang was happy to accept these 2 maids. After all, the 2 of them were not bad-looking and could be said to be pleasing to the eye. Lu He and Hong Ye's skills in serving people were also not bad, crossing their legs and massaging their backs. Every time they did so, they made people feel very comfortable. As for other hints, Xiaoyang ignored them. After all, there were some things that needed to be restrained. When the time came, it would not be good to say if something was left behind. Mu Yang sat to the side, a hint of envy in his eyes. These 2 women could be said to be peerless beauties, and their charm was not ordinary. How happy would it be to hug them left and right? Who would have thought that this guy would pass through 100 flowers, but not a single leaf would touch him? Of course, even if he wanted to now, he was probably powerless. Mu Yang had not been targeted by the Blood Buddha, and because of the aftermath of the attack, he had not been able to recover until now. Presumably, he was also not feeling good. What Mu Yang did not expect was that these people were really frightened by Xiaoyang and did not dare to make a move. They even sent 2 women to investigate, but the end result could be said to be unsatisfactory. In terms of controlling people's hearts, he was indeed good. If Mu Yang and Xiaoyang were not in the same line of work, and if he did not know about his situation, he would probably be frightened as well. At this point, Mu Yang also knew that even if Ouyangqing and the others came back to their senses now, it was already too late. After all, they had recovered a little, and if they used the eruption pill, it would not be a problem for them to kill their way out. Is there nothing interesting in your profound fighting world? Xiaoyang yawned and said with some dissatisfaction. When Hong Yi heard this, she smiled sweetly and said, Young master, you went to the #1 wonder of our profound Do world just now, and you found it boring. I'm afraid there's nothing else that can catch your eye. Lu He, on the other hand, was silent. She just lowered her head and pinched her legs, looking very wronged. At such a young age, Lu he had already cultivated to the 8th level of Kingwu. Moreover, she was Ouyang Cheng's last disciple. It could be said that she was proud and arrogant, but now he had fallen into a situation where he had to serve others tea and massage their backs and legs. Naturally, he was not convinced in his heart. However, because of his master's orders, he had no choice but to bow and bend his knees in this place. Hong Yi understood that she was the only one who knew the most important thing. In the past 2 days, he had tried several times, but the results he got were all very helpless. This was because she had also seen that this young man was indeed very terrifying. He looked sloppy, but he was always on guard against her. If she wanted to do something secretly, it would be very difficult, and it could be said that it was hopeless. As such, Hong Yi felt very helpless. She also realized that the opponent she had encountered this time was indeed very powerful, especially that attitude of his. No matter how she hinted, she could not get a response. Therefore, the idea of using that method to get some information out of him had turned into a bubble. Sister Hong Yi seems to be worried about how to explain to Ouyang Cheng. You have been by my side for 2 days and have been to countless places, but you still can't come to a correct conclusion. Seeing this, Xiaoyang smiled faintly and said, When Hong Yi heard this, she was stunned for a moment, but she still smiled faintly. Hong Yi, who had experienced too many things, knew that this was a point that both sides were well aware of. It was just that when to point it out, it was a technical job. At the side, Lu He's eyes were a little puzzled. Obviously, she did not know about this matter. You have served me well these 2 days. I don't mind telling you that when Ouyang Chen came with my condition, I might not be able to take him down. Xiaoyang said with a smile. Hearing this, Hong Ye's eyebrows suddenly furrowed, but they soon relaxed. This was because she knew that since this young man dared to say it out loud, it meant that he now had the ability to do so. However, until now, with my condition, the outcome of the battle with Ouyang Chen is still unknown. Xiaoyang said. Hong Yi, on the other hand, was indifferent. On the contrary, Lu he thought that this was a great opportunity. If everyone in the profound fighting world worked together, it was naturally possible to kill this demon. Since young master is so honest, I'm afraid that you still have some trump cards. When sect master Ouyang comes with the things, you can kill him and snatch the treasures. Then, you can raise a puppet and plunder. Isn't that perfect? As for the losses of those sects, you will naturally plunder from my sect. Hong Yi said with a smile. When these words came out, a trace of confusion flashed across Lu He's eyes. On the other hand, Mu Yang's smile became even wider. Sister Hong, Ye's thoughts are indeed good. I like you very much. How about you follow me in the future and join the flowing cloud world? Don't worry, I won't treat you unfairly. Xiaoyang said with a smile. Talking to smart people was never tiring. To be able to get such an answer made Xiaoyang feel very satisfied. Since both sides could clearly see the pros and cons, they would not rashly start a war. As long as they could safely return to the flowing cloud world with the things, it would be perfect. Even if they could deal with unexpected problems, it would still be a little tiring. When Hong Yi heard this, she helplessly laughed bitterly. As expected, this young man was like a bottomless well. You would never know how much strength he was hiding, and whether you could do anything about it. If this servant really betrays the world that raised me and joins young master's side, I'm afraid that young master will think that this servant has a problem with her integrity. Even if you won't treat me unfairly, you won't dare to put me in an important position," Hong Yi said with a smile. At this moment, Hong Yi was also very impressed with this young man, because not only was he talented and strong, but his temperament and calculation were also not bad. No matter how one looked at it, the profound fighting world was defeated by such a strong person. Although Hong Yi had thought of joining this young man, and perhaps she could go far in the future, she could only give up in the end because of the secular world. Chapter 1972. Hong Yi knew very well that if she followed this young man, she would have a lot of wealth in the future. She might even become stronger because of this. Even though to every cultivator, the pursuit of power has always been the most important thing, she didn't dare to give up everything. If she left with this young man and joined the flowing cloud boundary, everyone would see her as a traitor. When that happens, she won't be able to take away all her loved ones. She would be hated by this world, and it was very possible that she would suffer a fate worse than death. Hong Yi was somewhat beautiful and capable, but she didn't dare to take such a big risk. She was able to gain the attention of this omnipotent, but her loved ones might not. Xiao Yang merely smiled at this and didn't think too much about it. After all, this wasn't something that could be decided with just a few words. Therefore, there was no need to worry about these problems. He would just let nature take its course. Why think so much? Whether or not this woman joins the flowing cloud boundary was something that Xiao Yang didn't think was important. Plus, who knows if this person agrees but has ulterior motives? She might harm the flowing cloud boundary. Even though Xiao Yang was confident that he could suppress everything, it was inevitable that there would be some unhappiness. Why would he seek trouble for himself? Lu He, on the other hand, was repeating her work without slacking off. However, there were already countless thoughts flying through her mind. All this time, Lu He thought she was the heaven's favorite and her talent was unique. As long as she was given time, success was only a matter of time. Until she saw the man before her, she realized how laughable her thoughts were. The two of them could be considered to be of the same age. However, one of them was already undefeatable in the world while she could only endure and massage his back and legs. Seeing that the girl's face was also full of unhappiness, Xiao Yang didn't mind. To these girls who haven't seen the world, he could understand. These people had always been arrogant and prideful. They thought that their strength was superior and nothing could catch their eyes. Once they suffer a setback, their confidence would be greatly impacted. In fact, it was very normal for him to be unable to recover from a setback because of this. It was not strange at all. Mu Yang, on the other hand, was lying on the deck enjoying the breeze. He didn't seem to care about any of this, since the brat did not have the fortune to enjoy such a good thing. Then it was his loss. What did it have to do with an old man like him? At this moment, Mu Yang was carefully thinking about it. Now that Xiao Yang had opened his mouth to take the profound Dou world's resources, was it just to make the flowing cloud realm stronger? At the very least, from Mu Yang's point of view, this kind of power was leaving too quickly. It didn't make any sense. So, what exactly was he planning? This was something that Mu Yang had been pondering for a long time. However, it wasn't easy to figure it out. Therefore, he was also very helpless and could not give a reason. Mu Yang couldn't help but wonder how things were going to turn out in the future. He thought of countless possibilities, but in the end he rejected them all. He felt that this kind of thinking was too crazy and even a little unrealistic. Looking at the flowing cloud realm, Mu Yang threw all these thoughts to the back of his mind, because to him, this wasn't something that he needed to know. He would naturally understand it in the future. Worrying about this now was a little taxing on his mind. Therefore, there was no need to think too much about it. He just needed to follow the flow. Just like this trip to the profound Dou world. At that time, he couldn't tolerate the situation, so he came to kill his way over. However, there were many details that he didn't know. There were too many unknowns. There were also countless storms that had occurred, but hadn't he resolved them all? When night came, Xiao Yang also dismissed the two maids, Lu He and Hong Yi, and returned to his small room. He lay on the deck, frowning slightly. Now he was in a dangerous situation, but because he wanted to obtain more things, he could only pretend to be calm and wander around these places, not daring to leave easily. It could be said that if Xiaoyang showed the slightest flaw, he was afraid that Ouyang would immediately turn hostile. At that time, even if his life was not in danger, a fierce battle would be unavoidable. All along, killing was not the way to solve problems. Moreover, to teach the profound Dao world a lesson, it was enough to make them spit out all the things that they had swallowed over the years. Although the things that Xiaoyang wanted would not bankrupt the various sects of the profound Dao world, it was still possible for them to suffer a great loss. As for whether or not there was something fishy going on, it was still unknown. These things were about to come to an end. When Ouyang sent the things over, he could leave and return with a full load. It seems like it's similar to what I thought, Xiaoyang muttered and said with some self-mockery. Now, the things that Xiaoyang was worried about had indeed become reality. Now, it seemed that it was not an easy thing to step into the realm of martial emperor. In the realm of the gods, there were many people who were at the peak of King Wu. Why were they still unable to break through to the realm of martial emperor? Take Zhao Tianming, for example. With his ability, it was very possible for him to step into the realm of martial emperor. However, he did not manage to do so. Instead, he took the wrong path and condensed a fourth spiritual pulse that did not belong to him. As such, the worry in Xiaoyang's heart was completely resolved. In the 3,000 small worlds, there was only so much luck, so the quota for martial emperors was very limited. Every quota was occupied by various powerful worlds. If there were no martial emperors who died, it would be difficult for a new martial emperor to appear. Now that the quota for martial emperors was completely filled, it would be very difficult for Xiaoyang to break through to a higher realm. It could even be said that it was impossible. Therefore, how to fulfill the conditions that the Emperor God had set out became a huge problem that made him feel very helpless. This was a deep hole that was almost impossible to fill. And when would this alliance be implemented? Could it be that he really had to kill a martial emperor and forcefully obtain a slot for the sake of luck? Chapter 1973. This made Xiaoyang feel very helpless. However, with his ability, it was really impossible for him to kill a martial emperor. Even with Lil Flame's help, it was still a fantasy that was almost impossible to accomplish. Therefore, Xiaoyang was also very depressed now. What should he do about this matter had also become a huge problem in his heart. Furthermore, Xiaoyang also understood another principle. If he wanted to step into the martial emperor realm normally, he would have to wait until he ascended from the divine realm to the middle world. Only then would he be able to step into the martial emperor realm as soon as possible. However, Xiaoyang felt that there was no need to wait for tens of years. Moreover, forming an alliance with the realm of the gods and ascending to the middle world was a very safe way to go. Ascending to the middle world did not seem to be a problem. However, once they ascended, they would be surrounded by wolves. Countless worlds would want to conquer the weak middle world and steal their fate. Therefore, these problems became a knot in Xiaoyang's heart. He was also racking his brains to think of a way, hoping that he could find another way to achieve this alliance. However, all of this was not so easy. Even though Xiaoyang knew a lot of things, he was still in a bit of a dilemma when it came to this. After all, what he knew in his previous life was all about the top middle world. However, he was not clear about the rules of the small worlds. The night passed very quickly. Xiaoyang got up and returned to the bow of the ship. Just as he walked to the bow of the ship, a fragrant smell drifted over. He looked up and saw that Hong Yi had already prepared breakfast. She was standing at the side obediently, looking like a considerate maid. As for Lu He, she still had that unconvinced look on her face. "Your cooking is not bad." After Xiaoyang praised her, he began to eat his breakfast. Mu Yang did not know what he was thinking. He did not have the slightest interest in this sumptuous breakfast. He did not even look at it. Hong Yi, on the other hand, was silently waiting on the side. It could be said that she was doing her best. As soon as breakfast was served, Xiaoyang stood on the bow of the ship and stretched his muscles. He sensed a powerful aura rapidly approaching. Needless to say, within the current profound Do world, the only person who possessed such an aura was him, Ouyang. Today happened to be the third day of the agreement. It was the day to pay the compensation. Soon, Ouyang landed at the bow of the ship. When he saw Xiaoyang, he cupped his hands and bowed. "Brother Xiao, I wonder if you are satisfied with what the two of them used?" Ouyang asked with a smile. Now, Ouyang had a high-spirited appearance. Obviously, in these few days, because the people who were stronger than him in the profound battle world had all fallen, he was doing very well. In fact, he might even become the second Lord of the Alliance. That might even be in the bag. Although it could be said that the profound fighting world was no longer as glorious as it used to be. However, the status that Ouyang could obtain was much better than before. Xiaoyang glanced at him and said, "I think you know better than me how these two people are alike." When Ouyang heard this, he laughed awkwardly. Naturally, he knew the nature of these two women very well. Naturally, he had his own unique understanding of this arrangement. Fortunately, in these 3 days, everything was calm and there were no disturbances. In this way, Ouyang had defeated the 5 great sects and made them bow down to him. Therefore, even though Ouyang was facing a sky-high compensation, he still had a proud look on his face. Since something bad had already happened, no one could change it. Therefore, he could only let nature take its course and accept such a result. However, the benefits that he could obtain for himself were absolutely not small. Although Ouyang was still in a state of great loss, after a long time, the benefits would naturally come back. Let's get down to business. Xiaoyang was not in the mood to continue laughing. Ouyang originally wanted to use this opportunity to get closer to him, but he did not expect this young man to be so stubborn. He could only give up at this point. "The things that Brother Xiao asked me to prepare are all here." As Ouyang spoke, he also took out 3 storage rings and handed them over. Xiaoyang took it and glanced at it silently. Naturally, he was able to see through the contents of the book. Although there were some discrepancies, fortunately, it was not too different from what he had imagined. Therefore, there was no need to be bothered about some trivial matters. Ouyang stood at the side in fear. He also had to be careful. If he was not satisfied, it was very likely that he would burn the bridge after crossing the river and kill him here. These powerful people could be said to be temperamental. Who knew what they would think in the next moment? What your profound fighting world did previously was indeed unkind. It's better to forget about it in the future. Otherwise, the next time you meet, you may not have such a good temper like me. Xiaoyang smiled indifferently and said. Ouyang eyebrows immediately knitted together when he heard this. Xiaoyang's words were also very clear. He wanted them to let go of the control of the worlds that they had conquered. This would also be a very serious blow to them. In fact, many sects would probably change because of this matter. However, if you can't bear to, it doesn't matter. After all, this is your internal matter and has nothing to do with me. Of course, whatever happens in the future has nothing to do with me. Xiaoyang said indifferently. Ouyang could not help but frown again when he heard this. Naturally, he understood the logic behind these words. Who knows? When would a monster appear in another world? At that time, the profound fighting world would probably suffer a calamity because of the excessive abuse of power. This matter also caused Ouyang to have no choice but to think carefully about it. After all, the current profound fighting world could not be compared to the past. Even Zhao Tianming could fall and be killed. What else was impossible? Since he wanted to sit in the position of the master, he naturally had to worry about this world. Take care of yourself. In the next 10 years, you have to pay me tribute every year. The amount is 30% of the output of your profound fighting world. Xiaoyang changed the topic and said. Suddenly, Ouyang eyebrows furrowed again, but soon relaxed. Chapter 1974. Although Xiaoyang wanted him to submit and pay tribute, this was naturally a great humiliation. But because of his strength, he could only endure it and did not dare to flare up at all. Fortunately, there was a time limit. 10 years was a very short period of time for cultivators of their level. "Thank you for your kindness, Brother Xiao," Ouyang Cheng said with a trembling voice. Xiaoyang just waved his hand and said, "There is nothing else to say. You can take your people back." Hearing this, Ouyang Cheng immediately agreed. Dealing with such a person made him feel a little guilty in his heart. Because of the information sent back by Hong Yi, he had already understood that this young man was very scheming. Now that he looked sloppy, it was hard to say whether he had some malicious thoughts in his heart. "Brother Xiao, are you not satisfied with these two people?" Ouyang Cheng hesitated for a moment and said. Xiaoyang did not even look and said, "If they don't stay by my side these days, how can you be content? Since my goal has been achieved and I don't like them, what's the use of keeping them?" Hearing this, Ouyang Cheng helplessly laughed bitterly in his heart. It turned out that everything was within the young man's calculations. His little scheme was probably nothing more than a little thought to him. It was simply unworthy of his attention. But Ouyang Cheng could also be sure that in these 3 days, Xiaoyang was indeed very weak. But because of the fear in his heart, he missed a great opportunity. Now that Fierce Tiger's injuries had been stabilized, if he continued to provoke him, it would really be a dead end. Therefore, Ouyang Cheng could only take Lu, he and Hong Yi, and immediately leave, not daring to stay. After the two of them got off the ship, Xiaoyang directly controlled the flying ship and flew into the sky. He did not want to stay in this devastated and war-ridden, profound fighting world any longer. He did not want to stay for even a moment longer. These two beauties, are you really willing to part with them? Mu Yang, who had not spoken until now, spoke at this time. Xiaoyang thought for a moment and said, "If old senior likes them, then we can still go back now. It is not too late. Even if Ouyang Cheng is reluctant, under my might, he can only submit obediently." Mu Yang quickly waved his hand when he heard that. This was not what he wanted. He was just joking around. But who would have thought that this fellow would actually take it seriously? Ouyang Cheng stood on the peak and watched the airship disappear into the sky without a trace. Only then did he slowly let out a breath of turbid air, looking very tired. "Master, is that person really worth being afraid of? Don't tell me that even if all the cultivators of our profound fighting world join forces, we're still unable to kill that sick tiger?" Lu He's face was filled with hidden bitterness as she spoke in an unpleasant tone. Ouyang Cheng glared at his most beloved disciple. Soon after, he shook his head and said, "We all understand the principle. If everyone works together, we will naturally be able to kill him. However, who would be willing to throw their lives away?" As soon as these words came out, Lu He's eyes were full of doubt. Could it be that he had to drag out an ignoble existence and throw away his dignity? The profound fighting world that was originally filled with bloodthirsty people was now just a bunch of cowards? Such thoughts also spread in Lu He's heart. This also made her very confused as to why things had turned out this way. The profound fighting world had turned into such a state in the end. It was almost unrecognizable. Seeing this, Ouyang Cheng helplessly shrugged his shoulders. This disciple was indeed blessed by the heavens in terms of cultivation. But in terms of worldly affairs, she was like a child who did not know the pros and cons. Hong Yu patted Lu He's shoulder and said, "It is normal for you to not understand this now. When you see more in the future, you will naturally understand." Lu He was very dissatisfied as she slapped Hong Ye's hand away. She had always respected her senior very much. She did not expect that in these few days her status would really be lowered to that of a servant girl, doing all kinds of chores. Hong Yi did not bicker with Lu He. She understood that this little girl had too many things that she did not understand. Even if she explained it clearly now, it would be like playing the lute to a cow. There was no use at all. Therefore, it was better to save some saliva. When she experienced more in the future, she would naturally understand what was going on. Ouyang Qing thought for a moment and said, Lu He, when you go back this time, go to the back mountain and reflect on your mistakes for 10 years. As soon as these words came out, Lu He's eyes widened. She really did not understand why she was humiliated by outsiders, and now after returning she would be punished? What did she do wrong? Could it be because she did not throw herself into his arms? Sect Master, this little girl doesn't know much about the ways of the world. Asking her to come here is already making things difficult for her. Moreover, this is not Lu He's strong point. Hong Yi said somewhat anxiously. Ouyang Qing shook his head and said, there is already a problem with her state of mind. If she does not stop in time, it is almost impossible for her to make any progress in the future. Hong Yi heard this and could not help but frown again. If this was really the case, then it was a big problem. Soon, Ouyang Qing saw his junior brother flying over. After Wei Wuhui landed, he said, everything has been arranged. I wonder what senior brother thinks. There is no need. Ouyang Qing waved his hand helplessly and said, when Wei Wuhui heard this, he could only helplessly laugh bitterly. It seemed that these few days of planning were meaningless in the end. But speaking of which, they had already missed a good opportunity. How meaningful was the ambush that they had prepared now? The situation of the profound fighting world had also changed because of the young man's charge. Even those worlds that were enslaved had gained confidence because of this and began to clamor. When the flying ship had completely left the territory of the profound fighting world, Mu Yang was completely relieved and did not have so many burdens. Mu Yang did not feel safe leaving that place for a moment. Who knew when there would be a reckless young man who did not care about his life, and when that time came, a series of chain reactions would be very terrifying. On the contrary, Xiaoyang still had a look of indifference. It was as if everything was going according to his plan, and there was no need to worry too much. Senior, choose carefully. If there is one that you are satisfied with, you can take it. Xiaoyang said, and took out the 3 storage rings and handed them to Mu Yang. Mu Yang looked at the 3 rings and felt a little uncomfortable in his heart. Chapter 1975. Although Mu Yang had also put in a lot of effort in this crusade against the profound Do world, in his opinion, this was only insignificant. Moreover, it was more for the sake of his own satisfaction. Now that he was asked to take a reward, he felt a little awkward. However, looking at Xiaoyang's appearance, it seemed that he had already made up his mind to give these things to him. If he were to reject it, it would seem like he was being disrespectful. As such, Mu Yang did not refuse. Instead, he took the items and carefully selected them. In Mu Yang's eyes, there was no problem with the amount of effort he had put in. As such, this was what he deserved. There was no need to be so conflicted. There was not much meaning to it. Xiaoyang did not look at them. He lay on the rattan chair and gently rocked back and forth as he thought about the flowing cloud world's future. As for himself, what should he do if he wanted to break through to the martial king realm? These questions gave Xiaoyang a headache. It seemed that it would not be easy to achieve this. As such, it would be difficult to change the situation under these circumstances. However, what should he do next? Looking at the endless and vast sea of stars, Xiaoyang's heart was in a mess for a moment. There were too many things that he had to worry about. That was why such a situation had occurred. It was very helpless. It would not be an easy task to change that. As such, what should he do next was also a question in his heart. It was even to the extent that a single wrong step could cause him to step into a state of eternal damnation. At the very least, before he left the 3,000 small worlds, it would be impossible to change all of this. After a long time, Mu Yang finally picked out all the things he needed. He was also very satisfied with this. This trip to the profound Do world could be said to have made a lot of money. At the very least, he would not have to worry about his cultivation resources for the next 10 years. Mu Yang wasn't greedy either. He was well aware of the value of these things. Based on one's ability and contribution, one could only take as many things as one wanted. Sometimes, if one was too greedy, it might not be a good thing. Thus, one needed to carefully consider and consider. After putting everything in his bag, Mu Yang prepared to return the 3 rings. But he noticed that Xiao Yang did not relax. Instead, he looked even more serious, as if he was thinking about something. "What's wrong? Are you regretting not taking those 2 beauties with you?" Mu Yang teased. This was his usual style. Hearing this, Xiao Yang only smiled calmly and took the 3 rings. He didn't think too much about it. It was just a joke. "Senior, have you ever heard that the providence of the 3,000 small worlds is very limited?" Xiao Yang asked. When Mu Yang heard this, he immediately frowned and said, "I have indeed heard of this matter in many places, but I have never come into contact with that barrier, so I cannot be certain of the truth." In an instant, Mu Yang had a rough idea of what was going on. As for Xiao Yang's worries, there was indeed no way to solve them. "Is there any other way that can help me forcefully obtain a portion of providence to reach that level without killing martial emperors to steal their providence?" Xiao Yang thought for a moment and asked. Since Mu Yang was born and raised in one of the 3,000 small worlds, and had lived for so long, he had seen a lot. Perhaps he knew more about the situation. Mu Yang shook his head helplessly. The flowing cloud world was not a powerful small world in the first place. The fact that so many experts had appeared was all thanks to this kid. In this aspect, there were still many gaps in their knowledge. They had no idea what had happened before. "I'm not too sure about that, but if you're interested, I can look through all the ancient books when I return to the sect." "Who knows? There might be some records in there," Mu Yang said with a bitter smile. Hearing these words, Xiao Yang could only smile and nod his head. Regarding this, he did not have much hope in the first place. How to break through to martial emperor had become a problem in Xiao Yang's heart. How to solve this problem was also a big deal. As for asking the God Emperor, Xiao Yang felt that there was no need for that. This was because if the God Emperor had a way, Princess Mingzhu would not have been stuck at the peak of rank 9 for so long. In other words, even the most powerful God Emperor had no way to solve this problem. Then Xiao Yang said a few words and let Mu Yang take control of the flying ship to the flowing cloud world. Then he returned to his room alone. After returning to his room, Xiao Yang sat down cross-legged and took out a pill. This pill was a spirit-gathering pill that the God Emperor had given him. It could be used to form spiritual meridians. Now he wanted to break through and form the 4th spiritual meridian. From the beginning, Xiao Yang had been prepared to form multiple spiritual meridians. However, he had not found a good opportunity. Since it was impossible to rely on luck to break through to martial emperor, he could only find another way. Perhaps, as long as he formed enough spiritual meridians, the luck that he formed might be able to shake the heavens and the earth. This was not impossible. At the very least, they would only know the outcome after trying it out. The reason Xiao Yang took the pill from the God Emperor was very simple. After all, this item could help the flowing cloud world create a large number of rank 9 powerhouses in the future. Naturally, he could not miss out on this opportunity. Although Xiao Yang had the recipe, there were still differences between the world above and the pocket dimension. Therefore, using the God Emperor's pill to improve it was naturally the best choice. "Let's see how miraculous this elixir is," Xiao Yang muttered as he swallowed the elixir in one gulp. However, he did not immediately start to condense the spirit meridian. Instead, he sensed the thick medicinal power and tried to guess which herbs were used. Some of the herbs were not available in the flowing cloud world and needed to be replaced with something. As the ancestor of all pills, Xiao Yang could naturally distinguish these things clearly. Therefore, he quickly understood a house that had been improved and knew what to do next. Once this recipe was used, the flowing cloud world strength would increase greatly. Chapter 1976. Mu Yang sat on the bow of the ship, admiring the scenery of the vast star sea, feeling very relaxed and happy. Before meeting Xiao Yang, he had been working hard to improve his cultivation realm, and it could be said that he had been living in fear all this time. It wasn't until the encounter in Tianhe realm that he gained one more person he could trust, and he no longer had to continue fighting alone. Moreover, after defeating Zhao Tianming of the Profound Fighting World this time, it had brought about a huge change to the Profound Fighting World. Many enslaved worlds had broken free from the control of the Profound Fighting World because of this. Legends about the two of them continued to spread. Suddenly, the worlds that were able to regain their freedom saw these two people as saviors, freeing them from the sea of suffering and preventing them from continuing to be enslaved. There were even many worlds that showed their goodwill. When the seemingly tattered flying ship flew past their territories, they enthusiastically offered their treasures and even invited them to be guests. Because Xiaoyang was in seclusion, these things were handled by Muyang. For these people who had been enslaved for a long time, they also hoped that Muyang could give the Profound Fighting World a heavier blow. This way, they could sit back and relax in the future. In this regard, Muyang did not directly respond, but after accepting the gifts, he chatted for a while and let them go back. After all, there was a lot of knowledge in the war between worlds. If the Profound Fighting World really lost all its masters, it was likely that it would become a scorched land where not even a blade of grass would grow. Many right and wrong could not be clearly explained in a few words, so it was fine to just stand by and watch. What's more, their expedition to the Profound Fighting World this time was not in the name of upholding justice for these enslaved worlds. Their purpose was very simple. You invaded my world and caused damage to my world, so you must pay the price, that's all. Looking at the mountainous pile of gifts, Muyang did not want to look at some of them. At the same time, he also had a new worry, and that was, would this young man lose his own heart under these rich resources? As for the flowing cloud world, would it become the second profound Do world, enslaving other worlds and plundering their resources and destiny to become stronger? Although it looked very glorious, once they offended a world that they couldn't afford to offend, they would probably face a disaster in the end. At that time, everyone would kick a man who was down. The current Profound Fighting World was in such a situation. It was also because they were weak this time and their killing intent was not strong. Although the Profound Battle World had lost many masters and its vitality was greatly damaged, it was not something that could be completely overthrown by these small worlds working together. These questions gave Muyang a headache as well. There were too many twists and turns and possibilities. No one could tell what would happen next. They could only wait patiently. All of a sudden, Muyang felt the spiritual energy in the boat gathering at an incredible speed. The aura was growing stronger. I didn't think that this brat would be able to make new progress so quickly. He really is a monstrous existence. Muyang laughed bitterly. Muyang was very clear that when Xiaoyang left the flowing cloud world for the God realm, he was only a rank 7 Kingwu. However, in this short period of time, he had rapidly grown into an existence that stood proudly in the Kingwu realm. Although this kind of movement was not enough to break through to the Martial King realm, it was not a problem for him to condense a 4th spiritual pulse. When he was at the peak of rank 9, he was already so terrifying. Now that he had condensed a 4th spiritual pulse, just how terrifying would his strength grow? Muyang couldn't help but shudder at the thought of it. At the very least, he was not a match for him. Even if he had a saint-grade upper artifact, it would be difficult to fight against him. However, this was also a great thing. The stronger Xiaoyang was, the more confidence the flowing cloud world would have. Now, even Muyang had become very confident. He was certain that under the Martial King realm, Xiaoyang was probably an undefeatable existence. As such, other than the top worlds that could invade the flowing cloud world, the profound Do world and the demon world were not enough. As for those top worlds, they would not be interested in invading a barren little world. Very quickly, Xiaoyang walked out. At this moment, his aura had become somewhat overbearing. The main reason was that he had just condensed a 4th spiritual pulse. His 4 limbs were all connected by spiritual pulses. This made it difficult for him to control the power, which was why some of it leaked out. Muyang, on the other hand, was completely dumbfounded. The gap between them had widened a little too quickly. Moreover, under this kind of power, Muyang felt a little scared. At the very least, he believed that he did not have the ability to fight back against such an expert. He might not even be able to escape. After being shocked for a while, Muyang slowly came back to his senses. He cupped his hands and smiled. Congratulations to cultivator Xiao for successfully condensing a fourth spiritual pulse. You can be said to be an undefeatable existence in King Wu's realm. In Muyang's eyes, this was not a boast. It was the truth. Previously, Xiaoyang was able to defeat Zhao Tianming, who had condensed 4 spiritual pulses. Now his realm and strength were much stronger than before. He could be said to be at the peak of King Wu's realm. Xiaoyang smiled and shook his head. That's hard to say. In the realm of gods, there are the 4 divine generals. They are the true peak of King Wu's realm. The moment these words were spoken, Muyang couldn't help but frown. Naturally, he had also heard about the matters of the divine realm. It could be said to be the strongest existence in the 3,000 small worlds. It was the holy land of cultivation that every cultivator yearned to enter. However, the realm of gods had always been strict. Wanting to enter the realm of gods was not an easy thing to do. Although Wei Beixin, the last of the 4 divine generals, has already been defeated by me, I believe that I am about the same as the strongest one, Xiaoyang said with a smile. Hearing this, Muyang's eyebrows were immediately filled with shock. In other words, before they met, Xiaoyang had already defeated one of the 4 divine generals? Just how terrifying was this person's strength? And why did he start a fight with the 4 divine generals? Just what was going on? Suddenly, Muyang felt that this matter was not as simple as it seemed. He felt a little depressed. Chapter 1977. You youngsters are really full of vigor. Us old folks can't help but be envious. Muyang let out a bitter laugh in disappointment. Back in the drifting cloud world, Muyang could be said to be the most talented genius in the past 10,000 years. Yet, who would have thought that such a monster would appear and completely crush him? Even the force that this kid had created when he had just stepped into the upper realm was much stronger than the solar sect. On the other hand, Xiaoyang smiled nonchalantly. In the path of cultivation, everyone had their own destinies. At the same time, he was very impressed with Muyang. It was not easy for him to reach where he was today without abundant resources and opportunities. But sometimes the truth was so hurtful that it made one feel helpless. It looks like you forcefully started a fight with Zhao Tianming on this trip to the Profoundo world in order to sharpen your cultivation and pave the way for the formation of your 4th spiritual vein. Muyang asked with a bitter smile. Xiaoyang nodded without hesitation. Since he could kill 2 birds with 1 stone on this matter, then why not? At the very least, from the looks of it, the results were excellent. Now that he had almost surpassed King Wu's realm, he felt very comfortable. Xiaoyang really dared to say that he was invincible under the martial king realm. Even if it was the number 1 genius of the god realm, Princess Mingzhu, Xiaoyang did not think that he would lose if they fought. Back then, in the Divine Tomb, he saw the battle between Princess Ming Zhu and Honorable Siyuan Tian. Later on, she even fought against the powerhouses of the Greenly world. Senior, you should work harder. After all, your current realm is still not enough. Xiaoyang joked. Muyang beat his chest and stomped his feet. He looked very sullen. He was not a monster like Xiaoyang. How could his realm rise so quickly? I also want to soar 1,000 miles in a day, but I can't catch up to a monster like you. Muyang said helplessly. Soon after, Xiaoyang's gaze landed on the small mountain of treasures, and his eyebrows furrowed slightly. Although these items were not considered top-notch, they could still be considered to be of decent quality. These were sent by the people of the enslaved worlds. They said that they wanted to thank us for helping them escape from the sea of suffering. Even though the gift isn't that valuable, it's still better than nothing. Muyang yawned and said, Xiao Yang only nodded his head, slightly. He didn't really care about these things. From Mu Yang's expression, it was enough to tell a lot of things. As for those trivial matters, there was no need to care about them. After all, every world had its own development. Sometimes, help might not be of much use. It might even be counterproductive. I still need to continue my cultivation retreat. I'll have to trouble you to keep an eye on me, Xiao Yang said with a smile. Mu Yang nodded at first, but then he looked at Xiao Yang in confusion. You've just condensed your fourth spiritual meridian. Are you trying to break through to the fifth? Or that level? Mu Yang said, a little shocked. Xiao Yang smiled and nodded. That's what I was thinking. Hearing those words, Mu Yang covered his face with one hand and appeared to be in despair. He really was a monster. Under such circumstances, he didn't think about how to stabilize his level. Instead, he wanted to continue breaking through. It was terrifying. God Realm, Fairy's capital. The God Emperor sat on his high seat, looking at the magnificent palace. His brows were tightly furrowed. There wasn't a hint of joy on his face. Instead, he was worried. Within the hall, the three Wangs and one Cheng stood facing each other. Each of them had a different expression. Kingda didn't look good either. In this short period of time, he had become much more haggard. It was as if he had gone through a great tragedy. Too many things had happened in the God Realm. Lei Dingtian, Luo Rong, and Bai Jian had broken through to peak rank 9. Even his son Xin Wushuang had barely stepped into that level. Under such a grand occasion, Kingda should be happy. However, he couldn't feel happy at all. This was because there was still no news of his youngest daughter, Ziying. It was as if she had gone missing. She had stayed in the tomb of the god of sin for such a long time. Everyone knew what the outcome was. They just didn't say it out loud. Under such circumstances, no one dared to speak the truth. If one couldn't walk out of the tomb of the god of sin after more than 4 years, he would either die in there or become a tombkeeper because his mind wasn't strong enough. No matter which possibility it was terrible for Kingda. Moreover, he wasn't willing to accept such a reality. However, reality was cruel. No matter how dissatisfied one was, there was nothing one could do to change it. This was because there were many things that made one feel helpless. Brother King, I didn't manage to kill that old man. I'm here to accept my punishment. King Qin lowered his head. He seemed to be blaming himself. Naturally, King Qin also knew that the purpose of this crusade against the Greenly realm, and even allowing King Zhao to join in, was very clear. That was to fight for a position in the martial emperor realm, so that the hope of the realm of the gods could step into that realm as soon as possible. However, the end result was somewhat unsatisfactory. That old man was really ruthless. He would rather sacrifice his own disciple to continue struggling at death's door. Furthermore, that old monster's ability to hide was truly extraordinary. The Duke of Qin had spent a very long time chasing after him, yet he still managed to escape. The God Emperor laughed bitterly. He seemed very helpless. Originally, he thought that his 2 younger brothers would be enough to decide the outcome of the battle. He didn't expect that the old man would escape in the end. It was really detestable. Next, it wouldn't be easy to find a powerful person who was deliberately hiding in the vast 3,000 small worlds. The reason why King Qin came to accept his punishment was very simple. It was because the martial emperor expert who escaped could also cause the God Realm's 1,000-year plan to go to waste. It was very possible. King Zhao was also silent. This was because he was also responsible for the problems left behind by this battle. The old man from the Green Li world's escape was also related to his negligence. Fourth brother, don't think too much. There are not so many things in this world that go smoothly. Moreover, that old man is older than both of us combined. It's not strange that he fell into a trap, the God Emperor comforted. Chapter 1978. The God Emperor stood alone on the peak and looked up at the boundless galaxy. He subconsciously clenched his fists. They had already discussed this matter in the imperial court. In fact, they had even discussed a lot of countermeasures. However, which one would be easy to implement? Furthermore, this matter was of great importance. It was definitely not something that could be settled so easily. Even if a martial emperor was severely injured and extremely weak, as long as he could hide, it would be difficult to find him even if one had countless tricks up their sleeves. Originally, everything could be said to be within their grasp and they had everything under control. However, such a huge mistake had occurred in this matter. How could the God Emperor be at ease? In fact, he was already in great pain and was extremely helpless. His daughter, Princess Mingzhu, had already surpassed the peak of the 9th rank. She was only half a step away from becoming a martial emperor. However, that half a step was like a natural moat. It stood there and blocked her path, making it difficult for her to move forward. Therefore, how could the God Emperor not be frustrated? The two of them had surrounded and killed an old man. Even so, he had managed to escape. What was going on? This also made the God Emperor a little confused. Was it really that difficult to handle this matter a little better? Of course, the God Emperor would not suspect his brother. He knew that it was impossible for them to have colluded with the people from the Greenly realm or had received some benefits to let him go. However, how the person from the Greenly realm had managed to escape had become a mystery. Even though King Zhao had already explained everything clearly and there was no doubt about it, Chu Yunxing still couldn't believe it. However, in the Celestial Emperor's opinion, this was still an extremely abnormal thing. However, he had not been there personally. Therefore, he did not understand the details and situation there. Therefore, it was still somewhat difficult for him to get a clear understanding of the situation. Not long after, a woman walked up behind the God Emperor and said softly, "Husband, don't you believe in that young man from the flowing cloud realm? Who knows, he might really be able to create a miracle and complete the last piece of the puzzle." The woman's voice was very gentle and ethereal, making those who heard it feel relaxed and happy. The God Emperor's expression became much gentler because of the woman's words. He glanced over and shook his head with a smile. "If it's really that simple, then that's great. I won't have to be so worried." Although the Celestial Emperor believed in Xiaoyang, whether he could do it or not was still a big question. At least for now, the hope was still rather slim. During this period of time, nothing major had happened. Therefore, the Divine Emperor had not contacted Xiaoyang. He did not know if the young man he had taken a fancy to would be able to show a different side. Since you've already bet so much on that young man, why not be more optimistic? Moreover, even though Mingzhu was unable to step into the martial emperor realm in time, so what? Being late naturally has its benefits, the woman said. The God Emperor smiled and shook his head. In his eyes, cultivators had to fight for every moment. There was only so much luck. You had to fight for it so that you could become stronger. Sometimes, even if you were a little slow, you might be left far behind by others and be unable to catch up. The God Emperor had high hopes for Princess Mingzhu, so he had thought of ways to create conditions for her. After what he had done in the Greenly realm spread, his first reaction was to create an empty martial emperor realm position. Now that he's returned, who knows if he'll fall into depravity because of this? The God Emperor said helplessly. When the woman heard this, she frowned slightly. Since ancient times, heroes who returned home in glory had lost their spirit due to indulging in wine and women. That was not something that had never happened before. I think he's different. At least we can find out from Mingzhu, the woman said. The God Emperor was slightly taken aback. At this moment, his gaze changed. His daughter had mentioned Xiaoyang. Could it be that there was a change in the situation? However, Mingzhu was still in closed-door cultivation. It was impossible for the God Emperor to verify this. He could only ponder it himself. The dilapidated airship traveled through the vast starry sky. Along the way, there were some ignorant bandits who thought that the owner of the airship was a weak existence that could be bullied. When they saw that there were many treasures on the ship, they felt that they had struck gold. Hence, the bandits were prepared to rob everything. However, although the end result was the same, it was not very satisfactory. The reason for this was very simple. Their situation had completely reversed. The bandits who had been robbing them were robbed by Muyang alone. As a result, the small mountain of treasures increased by a lot. After robbing quite a number of bandits, Muyang slowly began to feel a sense of satisfaction. As expected, robbing others of their wealth was the easiest way to do it. Furthermore, it was very interesting. This method of using evil to deal with evil was rather interesting. Muyang suddenly understood why Xiaoyang was so insistent on getting them to hand over their treasures. Presumably, this kind of pleasure was hard to come by. Even Muyang was addicted to it. The more wealth one had, the better. The higher one's cultivation, the more resources one needed. After a lot of robbers were robbed, this kind of news spread. They knew that this seemingly broken airship was still showing off its wealth, which meant that it was fishing. As a result, when the bandits in the surrounding world saw the flying ship, they would immediately hide far away, afraid that they would be robbed. As time passed, no more fish took the bait. Muyang's injuries had more or less healed, so he began to feel bored. It was a terrible feeling to have nothing to do. Xiaoyang was also in closed-door cultivation. He did not even have someone to talk to, so it was inevitable that he would feel bored. Fortunately, they were already halfway through their journey back. They were only a few days away from the drifting cloud realm. After enduring for a few days and seeing the true appearance of an upper realm cultivator, Muyang couldn't help but exclaim in excitement. Right now, he was beaming with joy, as if he was a hero who had returned victorious from an expedition and was extremely pleased with himself. When the people of the upper realm saw the tattered flying ship, they were filled with respect. Chapter 1979. Everyone in the upper realm naturally knew that Xiaoyang and Muyang had returned in triumph. Now, Xiaoyang had undergone a huge change in the hearts of many people in the upper realm. From the very beginning, the ceasefire of the devil world was all due to his contribution. Because of this, the flowing cloud world no longer had to worry about being invaded, and they no longer had to worry about being invaded. Now that they were facing an even more powerful enemy, they could still fight back and return all the humiliation they had suffered. From this, it was enough to see just how terrifying Xiaoyang's strength was and just how terrifying his contributions to the flowing cloud world were. It could be said that after experiencing so many things, Xiaoyang was no longer just a simple name. He was an existence that countless people revered. Many young cultivators even saw him as an idol and worshipped him. They wanted to become someone like him. Many sects' attitudes towards Xiaoyang had changed greatly. Of course, it was not just because of their respect for his strength, but because of their respect for him as a person. Ever since Xiaoyang had left the flowing cloud world, many people had guessed that he would not return. Instead, he would join the God world and enjoy a better environment. However, many years later, he had returned. Moreover, after resting for a few days, he had set off again because of the losses in the flowing cloud world. He had charged towards the profound Do world for revenge. This was especially so for the sects that were close to Xiaoyang, like the Anya clan. They felt that it was their honor to be able to witness the rise of a resplendent star. In fact, they had even received a lot of help. The current Xiaoyang could be said to have reached the peak of his prestige, causing countless people to admire him. Looking at the hubbub below, the smile on Muyang's face became even wider. He was not jealous of this at all. Instead, he felt gratified. In the past, he had also received such treatment, but it had been much smaller. After all, compared to Xiaoyang's achievements back then, there was still a huge difference. It was not as simple as just a tiny bit. Each generation was stronger than the last. This made Muyang feel that the flowing cloud realm would only get stronger. After him, there were Chu Taiyin and Xiao Changshan who carried the burden. Although the two of them had wasted too much time in the demon world, they had also slowly matured. And now, there was a monster like Xiaoyang who had surpassed them. In the future, would there be even more powerful people appearing? or even an existence that surpassed Xiaoyang. With that thought in mind, Muyang couldn't help but feel excited. If that was the case, the flowing cloud realm would become stronger and stronger in the future. It might even be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with the God realm. In the end, Muyang gave up on the idea. He knew that if he really wanted to do it, it wouldn't be easy. Perhaps Xiaoyang was the ceiling of the flowing cloud realm. That was something that was still unknown. At the very least, the current drifting cloud realm was constantly growing stronger. This was enough. He could talk about the future in the future. How to live well in the present was the most important thing. What? You're still not going to show yourself? Muyang saw that Xiaoyang didn't move for a long time, so he reminded him. In the next moment, Xiaoyang kept the flying ship. Instantly, the two of them floated in the air, looking at the many cultivators looking at him with incomparable devotion and worship. Xiaoyang's lips curled into a smile. It was as if all the repayment he had done was worth it at this moment. Perhaps because the flowing cloud realm had been invaded by the demon world, and because there weren't so many so-called rules and regulations. Compared to other realms, it was more humane. Let's return victorious! Xiaoyang shouted. When the crowd heard this, they were instantly filled with excitement. Xiaoyang didn't disappoint them. The bastards who invaded them had lost, and from now on they could hold their heads high. They didn't have to worry about whether their realm would be invaded or enslaved. At the very least, in their flowing cloud realm, it would become a paradise. Everyone was cheering. This kind of result was very good for them. Regarding this, they were even happier. Muyang looked at the enthusiasm of the young people, and his smile became even wider. Looking at his companion beside him, he also revealed a smile from the bottom of his heart. It wasn't the fake smile that he had in the profound fighting world. His heart became even more determined. Following this person, the benefits would definitely not be lacking. Moreover, the realm they were in would become even stronger because of this. Suddenly, Xiaoyang felt that there seemed to be a trace of power below that was constantly flowing into his body. However, this power seemed to be illusory. Although it was very subtle, it couldn't be controlled. It was very strange. And this power also seemed to change according to the state of mind. After feeling this strange power, Xiaoyang felt a little surprised. It really didn't make sense. Where did it come from? Soon, Xiaoyang also felt something very strange. However, this feeling was very strange. It was a faintly discernible feeling, as if 100 claws were scratching at his heart. It made him want to know the answer very much. However, this feeling was really too weak, so he couldn't tell what was going on. However, the feeling of this power was still very comfortable. Although he didn't know whether this power was good or bad or what kind of existence it was, there was no way to delve into it now. Therefore, he could only put it aside for the time being. Sacred Lord of the Dark Night looked up at the high and mighty young man. Back then, his strength was still very weak, but at that time he was still extraordinary. When he had just entered the upper realm, he had led his own team to fight against the demon and even took back a dangerous place. Back then, the young man that they wanted to take in had grown to a level that they could only look up to in this short period of time. It was clear how terrifying he was. You all have to work hard in the future. You are all cultivators of the same generation, but now the gap is so huge. Sacred Lord of the Dark Night smiled. Ye 13, ye 19, and the others only agreed in a low voice, but they felt very helpless in their hearts. Even you old fellows can only look up to such a monster. What can they change? They thought back to the time when they traveled with Xiaoyang in the vast sea of stars. They had been cultivating all the time, but they couldn't compare to the young man who was napping on the rattan chair all the time. The more they thought about it, the angrier they got. Chapter 1980. Xiao Changxing and Old Master Xiao stood side by side in the mountain of the Xiao family. They looked at the high and mighty junior with extremely pleased smiles on their faces. They had never thought that such a hero would appear in the Xiao clan, which was already in decline. It was truly gratifying. Although Xiaoyang had spent most of his energy on his cultivation and the growth of Northern Light City, and they did not seem to have received many benefits on the surface. The Shao family had received many benefits in secret. The Shao family has produced a Shaoyang. What more could a husband ask for? Shao Chongqing smiled. The Shao clan's great master also nodded in agreement. The changes had happened far too quickly. The ordinary-looking young man had now become the strongest person in the flowing cloud world. Even Chu Taiyin and the ancestor of the extreme Yang sect, Mu Yang, could not compare to him. It's just a pity that the Shao family has only produced a single Shaoyang. There is no successor, Shao Chongqing said helplessly. The great master of the Shao clan was stunned for a moment. His eyes were filled with confusion. He did not understand what this meant. You've only seen the present. Since Shaoyang was able to break through from the lower stream to the upper stream, there will definitely be a chance. One day, he will naturally leave the flowing cloud world and head to an even vaster world. A bigger stage is where he should go. If he stays in the flowing cloud world, it will truly be a waste of his talent, Shao Chongqing sighed. When the Shao clan's great-grandfather heard this, he remained silent. What the ancestor said was indeed true. If Shaoyang left, who would be able to shoulder the burden of the Shao family? He and the ancestor were both old. Who knew when their souls would return to paradise? When that time came, the highest cultivation level in the Shao family would only be King Wu's 4th level. Compared to the current environment, that was naturally not enough. Without a successor, it was the most awkward situation. There's no point in worrying about this right now. Who knows when our Shao family will have a few more geniuses ascend from the lower realm. Shao Chongqing said with a smile. Old Master Shao just smiled and nodded, but he didn't express his opinion, because this matter was not something that could be explained in a few words. Back then, when they all ascended to the upper class together, it could be said that it was a magnificent feat that was hard to come by even in 10,000 years among the middle class. However, on second thought, since Lil Man could ascend alone, it was possible for others to do the same. As long as they let go of their authority over the middle stream realm, there would still be a small number of middle stream realm cultivators who had the qualifications to do so. Within the Sun Moon sect, a powerful aura suddenly spread out crazily. A cold aura made people shiver. It was as if the huge Sun Moon sect was about to be sealed in ice at this moment. Immediately, after many elders felt this cold aura, they immediately used all their strength to protect some disciples under their command so that they wouldn't be attacked. The Sun Moon sect master immediately went to the ancestral hall and knelt down, kowtowing, "Please have mercy on us, ancestor." As soon as these words came out, the chill quickly retreated at an extremely fast speed. In the blink of an eye, it gathered together and disappeared without a trace. In the next moment, a barefoot man walked out of the ancestral hall. He was expressionless. Suddenly, he looked up at the sky and saw the two extremely dazzling people, Shaoyang and Mu Yang. Congratulations, ancestor, for breaking through and peering into the great Tao. The Sun Moon sect master said joyfully. This terrifying aura also made the Sun Moon sect master understand that the ancestor's strength had now reached a new level. He was now at the level of King Wu's rank 9 realm. As a result, their Sun Moon sect also had a rank 9 powerhouse. Compared to the North Light City and the Extreme Yang sect, they were still not inferior at all. However, the Sun Moon sect master didn't know that within the rank 9 realm, there were also different levels. Chu Taiyin was only at the initial stage. Compared to Mu Yang and Shaoyang, he was still far from it. Chu Taiyin waved his hand and said, "It's just the beginning. There's no need to be so excited." On the other hand, the Lunar Sect's Grandmaster was taken aback for a moment. This was rather puzzling. The way Chu Taiyin looked at Shaoyang changed again. Now, he also began to ponder about this young man. What kind of plan did he have to actually give him such a miraculous elixir and even pass on a technique to allow him to enter the rank 9 realm? Chu Taiyin also received some news that the 4 people who fought against the Dark Doe world invasion had also received elixirs. The other three were still fine. They were all close to Xiaoyang and naturally weren't bad. However, he was Chu Taiyin and didn't have such a good relationship with them. In the future, when you see people from North Light City, be more tolerant. Don't think that just because I've reached the rank 9 realm of Kingwu, you can use your power to bully others. Chu Taiyin noticed that this person's expression was a little off and warned him. The Sun Moon Sect Master was stunned for a moment before nodding his head in agreement. Chu Taiyin didn't know what kind of big plan Xiaoyang had in mind. However, he was clear about one thing. Xiaoyang was very generous, and everything he did was for the flowing cloud world. How could such a person be suspicious? A nation's scholar was unparalleled. There was only respect. In Borealis City, Baldi and Chun Mingho stood side by side. Their eyes were filled with reverence. Chun Mingho, who wasn't completely convinced at first, was completely convinced at this moment. He knew that this time, he didn't follow the wrong person. Although they were outsiders, Xiaoyang's generosity didn't treat them as outsiders. "Brother, I didn't trick you when I advised you to follow boss," Baldi said with a smile. Baldi felt that his decision was very wise. Otherwise, they would still be robbing people in the vast sea of stars. Who knew when their heads would roll? Chu Taiyin broke through to the rank 9. Suddenly, Qin Mingho frowned and said. Baldi was stunned for a moment before he couldn't help but laugh. This Qin Mingho was still the same. He always wanted to compete with those in the same realm. Boss said that if we aren't prepared enough, we shouldn't try. Otherwise, it will only delay our future cultivation. Baldi said worriedly. Chun Mingho nodded slightly and said, I feel that I'm more or less prepared. I can go into seclusion to break through. With that, Chun Mingho turned around and left. Baldi stood there alone, dumbfounded. He could clearly feel that this guy clearly had some fighting spirit. That was why he was so anxious. However, it wasn't easy to persuade him. Boss has a way anyway. Go ahead and cause trouble, Baldi muttered. Chapter 1981. After receiving the reverence of tens of thousands of people, Xiaoyang saw that the sky was about to turn dark. After saying a few words, he headed towards North Light City. Everyone also retreated in a somewhat dispirited manner, each returning to their own homes. Senior, are you not going back to the Sun sect to take a look? Or are you going to my place as a guest? Xiaoyang asked with a smile. Mu Yang waved his hand nonchalantly and said, Following you will attract attention no matter where you go. That's why I want to let more people know of my name. Following you is the wisest choice. Xiaoyang could only laugh at this unruly senior. However, he did not dare to agree with this senior's words. In the past, Mu Yang was also in existence, revered by tens of thousands of people. Even if time had passed and people had forgotten about him, they would not forget him completely. Now that he had reappeared, it was enough for the entire Drift Cloud realm to remember this brave senior from 1,000 years ago. However, Xiaoyang did not care what Mu Yang was thinking. Although this old man was unruly when it came to important matters, he was not careless at all. Chu Taiyin has already broken through to Class 9. Is this your doing? Mu Yang asked hesitantly. Both of them had sensed Chu Taiyin's breakthrough, but they did not say it out loud. As such, only now did Mu Yang ask the question in his heart. Xiaoyang did not deny it. Instead, he nodded and said, First, I told my people about the secrets, then I asked them to send the pills and techniques over. However, I did not expect Senior Taiyin to break through so quickly. Hearing this, Mu Yang nodded slightly. At the same time, his eyebrows furrowed even more. The things that Xiaoyang was doing now were truly unfathomable. What kind of direction would this game of chess take in his hands? It could be said that although North Light City and Taiyin sect had some business dealings, their relationship was not that deep. It was not worth it to give such benefits. Naturally, there was a reason for Xiaoyang to do so. Why are you doing this? Or are you plotting something? Mu Yang asked worriedly. By now, Mu Yang could feel that something was amiss. There must be a demon behind the abnormality. Even though he didn't want to believe that Xiaoyang was such a despicable person who would do anything to achieve his goal, he was still unwilling to believe that Xiaoyang was such a despicable person. But everything felt too abnormal, and it was hard for people to avoid feeling that it was unreal. Sometimes, after investing so much, if one couldn't get a corresponding return, then the investment might seem a bit of a loss. Xiaoyang was a shrewd person. How could he make a losing deal? Xiaoyang was stunned for a moment, because he also felt that there was another meaning in these words. It was clear that Mu Yang was starting to question him. After some time, Senior will naturally know what I'm planning, Xiaoyang said with a smile. Mu Yang was still frowning, because he knew that Xiaoyang really wanted to become a martial emperor. Now, he himself had said that the karmic luck and quota had been occupied by others, so it was absolutely impossible for there to be no experts that had perished. Previously, when they were fighting with Zhao Tianming, they had witnessed an evil technique that had almost caused all of them to die there. So, could there be a connection between them? I hope that your mentality hasn't changed. I don't want to become your enemy in the end, Mu Yang said as he took a few steps back. His tone became very serious. Suddenly, Xiaoyang felt that the atmosphere had changed greatly. The person in front of him seemed to be very worried, as if he had gone down the wrong path. Xiaoyang didn't plan to explain this matter. After all, when the time came, all the sects would need to discuss it together. There was no point in revealing it now. Then, Senior, please wait and see, Xiaoyang stopped and said with a smile. Hearing this, Mu Yang smiled and said, okay. After saying that, Mu Yang turned around and flew back to his sect. Seeing the worried Mu Yang leave doubtfully, Xiaoyang could only sigh helplessly. However, with such a senior in the flowing cloud world, it was naturally not bad. At the very least, if there was a problem in the flowing cloud world, this senior would be the first to stand up. Sometimes, it wasn't wrong for a person to think a little more. After all, there were many things that needed to be prepared for the worst, and how to deal with it couldn't be the slightest bit careless. However, Xiaoyang didn't ask what Mu Yang was worried about. He didn't know. This was because he felt that when the dust settled, they would be able to understand each other's thoughts. Then, Xiaoyang continued forward. Mu Yang, who was flying in the air, still had a worried look on his face. The situation could be said to be changing rapidly. He began to think carefully about when he had met Xiaoyang. After he returned, what was the person he had heard about like? What had happened to him in the 2 times they had met? At the very beginning, the impression that Xiaoyang had given him was that he had acted righteously and heroically. In fact, for the sake of breaking through to the next realm, he did not hesitate to take out precious medicinal pills. After returning to the flowing cloud world, he had found out that it had been invaded by the outside world. He had been furious and had directly charged over, killing many of the rulers of the other world. He had even enslaved them and made them pay tribute to him within 10 years. Although such a legendary person was somewhat cruel to the outside world, he seemed to have always treated his own world and fellow cultivators with preferential treatment. Moreover, this kind of preferential treatment was more or less without asking for anything in return. It was too generous, to the point that it was unbelievable. As such, Mu Yang felt that this matter was too strange. Could it be that he had seen too much evil in the outside world, so he wasn't willing to believe in those good things? The more he thought about it, the more uncomfortable Mu Yang felt. Naturally, he hoped that everything would be as good as he had thought, and that there would be no problems. However, reality was not something that could be taken for granted based on simple thoughts. If Xiaoyang had been a little more heartless, he would have believed that this person was real. However, now he was confused. To the people of his world, the benefits were too perfect. Chapter 1982. Xiaoyang didn't think too much about what Mu Yang was thinking. From his point of view, many things would change with time. Some misunderstandings would also change because of this. He understood the good intentions behind this. Not long after, Xiaoyang returned to Borealis City. He didn't make a big fuss about it. Instead, he quietly returned to his residence to rest. After discovering that Lil Man had also entered seclusion to cultivate after receiving the resources he had given her, Xiaoyang didn't disturb her. Xiaoyang found a wrought tin chair and laid down in the courtyard. As he looked at the stars in the sky, his state of mind became very peaceful. When he was outside, he had been worried about his own safety. He had been constantly thinking about what his next step should be. However, only after returning to this small courtyard would he feel slightly more at ease. He didn't think about anything. He just laid there leisurely. Borealis City was filled with a fragrance. It was the fragrance of meat. There was a lot of meat from the dark sky ox. Even though Sun Dishing had already sold a lot of it at a friendly price, there was still more than enough left to make soup. This was especially true for the power contained within the bones. It would take a very long time to completely refine them. Standing on top of a tall building, Sun Dishing and Sun Yukai looked down at the huge Borealis city. They were very satisfied. Although the two of them were indeed very limited in terms of cultivation, this was not important. In terms of management, they were extraordinary. Furthermore, they had met a wise ruler who didn't suspect them in the slightest. He had even given them authority to do whatever they wanted. They didn't let down Xiaoyang's expectations. Under their management, Borealis City prospered day by day, and its influence had become extremely great. Although Sun Dishing and Sun Yotsai's cultivation base wasn't high when they went out, even the upper-class members of the sect would have to be respectful. They didn't dare show the slightest bit of disrespect. Although there were many experts in Borealis City, they all listened to the two of them. He's already returned. When are we going over? Sun Dishing asked hesitantly, looking at the huge cauldron on the square. Sun Dishing's eyes lit up. Sun Yukai thought for a moment and said, "There's no need to rush. He just came back, so let him have a good rest. If there's really something, he'll naturally summon us. Now, why do we have to worry about nothing?" In this regard, Sun Yukai had seen through a lot. There was no need to be too nervous. After all, they didn't do anything wrong, so what was there to fear? However, Sun Dishing was still worried. He turned around and sat down, saying with melancholy, "Our cultivation realms are too low right now. Not to mention that we can't compare to Qian Guangqi and Arctic Gray Feather. Even among the disciples we just accepted, there are some who are at higher realms than us. Now, I've heard that Baldi and Qin Mingho have their own fortuitous encounters and are about to break through to King Wu level 9. After saying that, Sun Dishing also felt the pressure on him increase greatly. On the other hand, Sun Yukai still looked calm and composed. They didn't seem to care much about these things. "Are you really not afraid? When the time comes, our words will have no weight. When the time comes, we won't have much strength. If someone wants to frame us, how can we protect ourselves?" Sun Dishing said. In this regard, Sun Dishing had been worried about this matter during this period of time. The people in North Light City were getting stronger and stronger, which made him more and more worried. Previously, they could dispatch these people at will, but now they had to be careful. "You mean to say that we should retire now? In this case, it's not bad. It can be said that we've succeeded and retired. To be able to build North Light City to its current state, it can also reflect our strength." Sun Yukai laughed bitterly and said. Sun Dishing nodded. He felt that it was enough to come to this step. Although he believed that Xiaoyang wouldn't do something like burning the bridge after crossing the river and getting rid of the donkey after it had outlived its usefulness, the group of them often went out to train and didn't know much about the situation in Northern Light City. If something really happened to the two of them, so what if the injustice was cleared? They would still lose their lives. But I'm unwilling to retire now. Now that North Light City is still rising, if we leave, I'm afraid we will miss this great opportunity. Sun Yukai said solemnly. How could Sun Dishing not understand this point? But those worries in his heart also made him not dare to continue to stay. The weather was unpredictable, and it was hard to say when he would die without a trace. I believe in Xiaoyang. Since he wants to be a free and easy boss, it's impossible that he won't care about us. After all, if we're gone, who will take care of those trivial matters? Baldy and Qinmingho, who are born bandits? Or Qi and Guangqi and Arctic Grey Feather, who are wholeheartedly focused on cultivation? Sun Yukai said. Sun Dishing was stunned for a moment and immediately said, with the current momentum, even without our precise control, any ordinary person can step on Xiaoyang's back and let North Light City continue to rise. Now that Xiaoyang had also achieved the general trend, the place where he was enough to bring a lot of energy. Therefore, it also increased the tolerance for mistakes. Now was different from the past. At that time, North Light City was not as big as it was now, and it needed incomparably precise arrangements. Now there was no need. Back then, the two of them were providing timely assistance. Now, even adding flowers to brocade seemed a little forced. In that case, then we might as well wait a little. Let's see how Xiaoyang's attitude is before we decide. Sun Yukai said with some disappointment. Retreating in the face of a crisis always required great courage. Therefore, Sun Yukai was unable to make such a decision now, and he still had a trace of joy, feeling that he could continue to try everything. Perhaps there would really be a turning point and let his reputation reach a higher level? How could Sun Dishing not want to continue to show his ability in his heart? It was just that the situation was different. Although the group of people at the top was still respectful to them, those disciples were a little arrogant now. As the saying went, gossip was a fearful thing. In this world where strength was respected, what kind of situation was impossible? Without strength, you were weak and in a high position. That was a sin. Some people would inevitably make some fuss about it. Sun Dishing did not refute and was also prepared to wait and see. Chapter 1983. North Light City's reputation had become even stronger after the city lord, Xiaoyang, returned victorious from his expedition to the profound battle world. For a period of time, it could be said to be in the limelight, and countless people admired him. In fact, in the eyes of most people in the upper realm, he was already in existence akin to a guardian god. His achievements could be said to be the highest in the history of the flowing cloud realm. During this period of time, many sects came to congratulate him one by one, but none of them were able to see Xiaoyang. However, Sun Dishing and Sun Yukai received them very well, and there was not the slightest bit of mishap. Although those sects were somewhat regretful that they were not able to see the strongest person in history, when they thought about how North Light City did not become overbearing because of this, they were filled with emotions and felt very comfortable. At the same time, the Extreme Yang sect was also very busy. After all, the expedition was to the profound battle world, and there was still Muyang. Muyang had been away from the drifting cloud boundary for 1,000 years. Although he still had a lot of emotions, he didn't think too much about these young people. He didn't meet them. Instead, he stayed in a secret room and read some ancient books. Muyang was already a little worried. He was afraid that Xiaoyang would go astray because he wanted to become a martial emperor. Therefore, he needed to think of another way. If he could solve this problem, then Xiaoyang would naturally be able to get rid of his crooked thoughts. However, during this period of time, no matter how Muyang read, he was unable to find an answer that satisfied him. He felt very helpless in his heart. After returning from the profound battle world, there had been no news of these two almighty people who had outstanding achievements and were worshipped by tens of thousands of people. This made many people feel somewhat worried. Could it be that they had paid a great price for this expedition? That they had suffered extremely serious injuries, so they did not show up? Although some people made such conjectures, they did not spread it. This was because they could clearly see that some words were not suitable to be said. Therefore, it was fine to keep it in their hearts. Some things, if revealed, could cause some accidents. No matter how the situation changed outside, the two of them acted as if nothing had happened. They did not show their faces in the upper realm and did not even say a word. Even some of the higher-ups in the North Light City began to worry. Could it be that something had really happened, so Xiaoyang had been staying in his own house? In the past, whenever Xiaoyang returned, he would have to deal with some worldly affairs and preach the Tao to the disciples of his sect. But now, not a single word had been said. It was inevitable that people would be worried. On this day, Sun Yukai and Sun Dishing came to a hall after dealing with the sects who came to visit. Qian Guangqi, Arctic Gray Feather, and Lin Shiyan were all present. Baldy and Old Master Shao were also present. As for Chen Mingho, he was in seclusion to break through to the next realm. Their faces were filled with worry because all of this was too strange. It could be said that these people were the backbone of Northern Light City. They were the center. Great Master Shao, why don't you go and see what's going on? Qian Guangqi said in a low voice. When Old Master Shao heard this, he waved his hand and said, "How can I ask now? Besides, what if Xiaoyang is really in seclusion? If we disturb him, I'm afraid he will be in a mess." Arctic Gray Feather and the others also sighed helplessly. None of them had the ability to investigate what was going on inside. They could only wait anxiously and helplessly. Everyone, don't panic. When I passed by his door yesterday, I smelled a medicinal smell. I think the city lord is refining pills. Nothing will happen. Sun Yukai slowly opened his mouth at this time and said, when everyone heard this, their hearts calmed down a little. He came back from so far away to refine pills. It seems that his injuries are not light and he needs pills to recover. Arctic Gray Feather said. Everyone nodded in agreement. This also made them realize that the strength of the profound fighting world was probably beyond their imagination. As the saying goes, as long as the person doesn't show up, all kinds of guesses could appear. Xiaoyang still didn't know about these things and was still immersed in his own alchemy. After returning to rest for a night, Xiaoyang began to refine pills. He felt that if he wanted more experts to appear in the flowing cloud world, he naturally couldn't do without these pills. Since the flowing cloud world was relatively weak in both spirit energy and luck, it was difficult to nurture experts. Therefore, he could only rely on external forces to change it. It could be said that there were still many talented cultivators in the flowing cloud world. However, because of the lack of luck, it was extremely slow and even difficult to break through. However, once this spirit-gathering pill of the God Emperor was produced, it could help many people cut through the gap between the 8th and 9th level. In this way, they could safely enter the 9th level. Not long after, a refreshing pill fragrance wafted out, making people feel very comfortable when they smelled it. Xiaoyang took out all the pills from the cauldron and quickly put them into a bottle. He sealed it well to prevent the medicinal power from leaking out. This time he didn't manage to refine many pills, only 9 of them. However, if he wanted to use these 9 pills, it wouldn't be an easy task for the current flowing cloud world. Xiaoyang named this pill the Meridian's Condensing Pill. It was an improved version of the spirit-gathering pill made by the God Emperor. Moreover, compared to the spirit-gathering pill, the medicinal power was much more mild. However, at the same time, it was also very long and very suitable for the cultivators of the flowing cloud world. Looking at these pills, Xiaoyang shook his head helplessly. If these pills could be used, then the flowing cloud world would probably have many more 9th level experts. The overall strength would also undergo a huge change because of this. After putting away these pills, Xiaoyang closed his eyes and sensed the location of Sun Yukai and the others. After coming back for so long, he had thought about most of the problems, so there were some things that needed to be discussed. Suddenly, Xiaoyang felt that everyone was gathered somewhere as if they were discussing something. Soon after, Xiaoyang withdrew his divine sense and strode over. When he went out, Xiaoman was still in seclusion. However, her aura was much stronger than before. Presumably, it wouldn't be long before her cultivation level would break through again. Just as everyone was discussing what to do with worry, Xiaoyang suddenly appeared in front of them. Chapter 1984. When everyone saw Xiaoyang suddenly appear in front of them, they looked at each other and quickly lowered their heads. as if they had done something wrong. Just now they were still guessing what was going on, but now that he had suddenly appeared in front of them, they were really not used to it. They were a little dazed and did not know what to say. Seeing that everyone was in a strange state, Xiaoyang was also a little puzzled. Could it be that he had offended them somehow? On the other hand, it was a little strange that these people had come so neatly. I didn't expect all of you to be here. At least I don't have to look everywhere. Xiaoyang smiled faintly and said, it could be said that other than Baldy, these people were the core people who had built the Northlight City back then. Baldy was just an outsider, but he had also integrated into the team at an extremely fast speed and had taken on the heavy responsibility of protecting the Flowing Cloud world. After returning and knowing that Baldy and Qinmingho were willing to fight for the safety of the Flowing Cloud world, he did not treat them as outsiders. After speaking, Xiaoyang walked to the empty seat in the middle and sat down. All along, that seat had been Xiaoyang's. Even if he was not there, no one would sit there. Qian Guangqi, I didn't expect you to move so quickly. You are about to step into the 7th level of Kingwu. Congratulations. Xiaoyang smiled with satisfaction. This group of people could be said to have ascended together with Xiaoyang. Their talents were naturally not bad, but compared to Xiaoyang's knowledge and luck, they were still a little lacking. Therefore, in terms of cultivation level, they could not catch up. Arctic Gray Feather was not bad either. He was at the 6th level of Kingwu and was very stable. Old Master Xiao and Lin Shiyun were slightly worse. They were at the 5th level of Kingwu. Although he wasn't at the peak of the current Flowing Cloud boundary, if it was in the past, he would still be a giant existence. Qian Guangqi laughed awkwardly and said, compared to a monster like you, I am still far from it. Xiaoyang only smiled and did not continue to dwell on this topic. After all, not everyone was as lucky as him. Since everyone is here, I have something to discuss with all of you first. Xiaoyang said softly. After hearing this, everyone's expression became a lot more serious. This was because they knew that since Xiaoyang said this so seriously, it was obviously not a small matter. Baldy on the side, Baldy touched his head and asked in a simple and honest manner, Boss, do you need me to leave? In Baldy's opinion, he was still an outsider. There were some things that were better left unasked. Xiaoyang waved his hand carelessly and said, You are now a member of the Flowing Cloud world. Why do you need to leave? Baldy heard this and could not help but feel touched. As long as he could be acknowledged, he felt that everything he had done was worth it. What's more, Boss treated him well. How valuable was a pill that could help him break through to the 9th level? Didn't he just give it to him? Even Saint-level Dharma artifacts and some Dharma techniques were not stingy. What is it? Qian Guangqi asked in a serious manner. Now, they were all very curious. After all, many things could be decided by Xiaoyang alone. If they were to discuss it together, it was enough to see how big of a matter it was. Then, Xiaoyang waved his hand and isolated this part of the world with a divine ability so that no one could find out anything. This time I went to the God realm and received the God Emperor's appreciation. Therefore, he is prepared to form an alliance with the Flowing Cloud world. Xiaoyang lowered his voice and said, Once these words were spoken, it immediately caused a huge commotion. This was especially true for the Baldy, whose expression was filled with shock. Arctic Gray Feather and Qian Guangqi had also ventured out and knew how big the God realm was. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was the number 1 among the 3,000 small worlds. It could even be said that it was a crane among chickens. If they could form an alliance with the God realm, the position of the Flowing Cloud world would become even more stable. Additional conditions? I'm afraid it's not that simple. Moreover, if we don't have anything that they want to form an alliance with the God realm, why would they agree? Arctic Gray Feather said hesitantly. There were too many problems in this, and Arctic Gray Feather was very worried about it. There is only one condition for forming an alliance, and that is that I have to reach the Martial Emperor realm for it to take effect. Xiaoyang said helplessly. This was Xiaoyang's biggest headache. It was not an easy thing to make this alliance take effect. Everyone's gazes towards Xiao Yang changed once again because they felt that it was a little too difficult for him to accomplish. The Martial Emperor realm was a realm that only existed in legends. It could be said that in the history of the flowing cloud world, there had never been such a person. What is the purpose of this alliance? Old Master Xiao said with a heavy heart. Old Master Xiao had been in charge of the Xiao family for many years. Naturally, he knew about the alliance. If there were no mutually beneficial conditions, how could they form an alliance? Xiaoyang took a deep breath and said solemnly, "The purpose of this alliance is for our worlds to ascend to the middle world together." When he said this, many people were stunned and did not understand. What we know is the 3,000 worlds, and we are the 3,000 small worlds. For example, we are now in the lower realm. Above us are the middle realm and the upper realm. Xiaoyang saw that they did not understand and explained again. Previously, Xiaoyang wanted to explain it properly, but he was afraid that they would not understand. However, with the situation of the flowing cloud world, there were some similarities and everyone could understand it better. When Qi and Guangqi and the others heard this, they understood the meaning behind it. All along, they felt that being able to ascend to the upper realm and see countless worlds was already the peak. They did not expect that this was just the beginning. This was only the 3,000 small worlds. Above them were the 3,000 medium worlds and the great worlds. I did not expect that we were still frogs at the bottom of a well and knew nothing about these things. All along, I thought that I was close to the peak. I did not expect to be so complacent just from a small hill. Qi and Guangqi said self-deprecatingly. The others also smiled bitterly. This was indeed a huge blow to them.